Chapter 410. When they arrived at Sector R, Silen walked out of his lab. His idea wasn't complete yet. Right now he only had a rough outline of it, and there wasn't much he could do after that. All he could do was wait. Wait for it to mature. There was a bottle inside Silen's lab, and inside it was a tiny dot invisible to the naked eye. Right now it was just an embryo, an artificial embryo. Silen was waiting for it to complete its development. Right now, Silen didn't know how long it would take, but it shouldn't be too long. Behind Silen, Huimao looked listless. It wasn't because he was tired, it was because he was bored. He was only responsible for processing some data, and it wasn't enough to tire him out. However, for the restless Huimao, it was torture to face those boring data all day long. Every time this happened, Huimao would always admire Cheto. Just like Silen, the guy always stayed for a very long time without complaining. It's out. Lung bit into an apple and lay on a chair in boredom. He stared at the current situation of every sector on the screen in front of him. Right now, every sector was busy. The League of Stars Army, Sector Army, and some private armies were playing their part, but the number of infected people was still rising. Up until now, the total number of deadly viruses discovered had reached 103. This definitely wasn't the end. The number of viruses was still climbing, and most of them were artificial viruses. The development of vaccines wasn't going too well. Although some of the more remote planets were favored, most of them were controlled by the big families a long time ago. No one could enter them at all, and there were even private armies stationed on the planets. If a normal person tried to barge in by force, they would probably be wiped out in space before they could even get in. Right now, the transit planets of Sector R were almost all abandoned cities. The garrisons outside the planets had destroyed every spaceplane that tried to escape. There was no room for negotiation at all. Those who had slipped out previously had already infected more planets. Therefore, they could not afford to be lenient at all. It was absolutely impossible for them to use their connections to open an exit now. With the increasing danger level, no one dared to be careless, nor did they dare to be lenient. There were many viruses that could affect a person's emotions, causing them to lose control, become irritable, bloodthirsty, and full of aggression. Therefore, many places with serious epidemics were in chaos. The infected people were like madmen, committing atrocities everywhere. There were bloodstains everywhere, and the local army directly killed such people. The situation right now is terrible, Lung said as he looked at the image on the screen. The actions taken by various places were to eliminate the virus directly. However, people were constantly being infected by the virus. There were all kinds of viruses, some were aggressive, some were non-aggressive, and so on. Until now, they only knew that the nightmare taper was responsible for bringing in the virus. However, where exactly was the main source of infection, the nightmare taper? Have they started the first round of division reproduction? Based on the current situation, I'm afraid there won't be much progress for the time being. Moreover, the area of infection will continue to expand. Before this, there were only 20 or so planets showing signs of infection, but now it's close to 200. However, it might be better if the defenses at the back are in place, Knight said solemnly. By in place, he meant to completely isolate the planet and prevent any alien from entering the planets where the infected were yet to be discovered. This also meant that a lot of people would be trapped in space, unable to find their home planet. Get ready, we're almost there. 20 minutes countdown, Ci Jincheng said. 20 minutes was 20 minutes to be precise. Sector R was relatively close to the transit star. Although it wasn't in a neighboring region, it wasn't too far away. Most people who escaped from the transit star wouldn't try to escape to that planet. The closer they were to the transit star, the easier it was for them to be infected. Therefore, those who had escaped from the transit star with great difficulty would definitely run further away instead of settling down on this planet where the pharmaceutical factory was the main source of their survival. When they arrived at the red planet of choice, their spaceplane did not enter immediately. Instead, they performed a general analysis of the planet's current situation. Right now, this planet did not match the data when seen from outer space. This planet might not be a rank A livability planet, but a rank B livability coupled with the strong physique of the local residents meant that there were quite a lot of people living on this planet. Most of the people working in the pharmaceutical factories were local residents. However, this planet was no longer as clear as before. The entire planet looked misty and surreal. Some places were still flashing with the light of explosions. The explosions were small, but they were very frequent. The battle situation was intense. From the detector, it could be seen that the entire planet was filled with haze. Due to the dispersion of drugs, the habitability of the entire planet had dropped from B grade to close to C grade. Even the local residents would not be able to live in such an environment as before. After a long period of time, they would definitely be seriously affected and might even die. The 3 largest pharmaceutical factories have exploded. C.I. Jincheng said. The explosion of the 3 largest pharmaceutical factories on this planet was the culprit that shrouded this planet in smog. The air is too toxic. We must wear protective clothing later, and we need to change our weapons. Silen said while looking at the image captured by the probe on the screen. Monsters appeared on the screen one after another. Although they could not see clearly under the influence of the smog, it was still possible to make out that they were definitely not humans. They were 2 to 3 times bigger than normal people, some were even bigger. Also, the long claws on their arms and toes, and the tail behind them all showed that they were not humans. The residents of the planet were fighting against these monsters. These are biochemical beast men formed from biochemical beast embryos and biochemical human embryos. C.I. Jincheng said, I've seen a similar message before, but that was a few years ago. I didn't think that I'd see it now. Then are they humans or beasts? Pride frowned. They are not humans, and they are not pure beasts either. From the image, it could be seen that many of these biochemical beast men walked upright. They had arms and legs, some were closer to humans, and some were closer to beasts. They were the results of miracles, modifications. The majority of the planet's population was not the infected, but these biochemical beast men. This also proves one thing, there is indeed a miracles stronghold on this planet. They are planning to wipe out all the people on this planet. After the death of the people on this planet, the biochemical beast men, and the infection of the virus, in such a busy period, the best and simplest solution for the government of the League of Stars is to directly destroy this entire planet. This is a stronghold that has been abandoned. C.I. Jincheng said. Knight and the others also nodded when they heard C.I. Jincheng's words. Lung looked at Silen and was about to ask Silen what his thoughts were when he realized that Silen was daydreaming. Hey, what are you thinking about? Say it. Lung elbowed Silen. Silen came back to his senses and shook his head. He did not say anything. Lung looked strangely at Silen and did not disturb him anymore. Silen had been acting very strange lately. Could it be that he was doing research? That was why they said that those who were doing research either had mental problems or mental problems. Silen ignored Lung's strange expression. He was puzzled. He had sensed a strange signal ever since he approached this planet. He had asked Huimao and Cheto, but neither of them had received any similar signal. This was what troubled Silen the most. Huimao and Cheto hadn't received it, and this spaceplane that was loaded with all kinds of advanced instruments hadn't received it either. Was he the only one who received it? Could it be that the magnetic field and ion activity of this sector had caused the signal abnormality? However, this signal's compatibility was too high. It was as if it was released specifically for Silen and guided Silen to it. Prepare your equipment. We will land in 5 minutes. Countdown begins. C.I. Jincheng said. The operation plan was already displayed on the big screen. Their main target this time was one of the 3 largest pharmaceutical factories. There was a relatively strong signal underneath this factory, and the explosion didn't completely weaken the underground signal. There was no doubt that Miracle's research base was underground. Even if it was an abandoned research base, they could still find a lot of clues. It would be a great harvest if they could find some useful information, and maybe they could even find more hidden strongholds using this base. This pharmaceutical factory was located next to a wide river. The river flowed very fast and tumbled. It was possible to see some human and biochemical beasts floating on the surface just a moment ago, but they were all swept away by the waves in the next moment. It was as if there was a giant beast underneath the river. The river was seriously polluted. There was no doubt about that. The color of the water looked like a drug. Kong Man and Alan stayed on the spaceplane. They would follow the others and provide support and equipment at any time. The other 16 people would go down later, including Hui Mao. The guy was itching for something to do. The sound of firearms being assembled was endless. A minute later, it stopped completely. Everything was ready, and everyone was standing on the landing board at the hatch and adjusting their breathing. They were all people who had been on the battlefield for a long time. There was anticipation, calmness, but no nervousness. Even someone like Pride, who usually had the air of a noble young master, could clearly feel the change in him now. He looked much steadier and more imposing. Although there was still a hint of arrogance, it was undeniable that he was indeed capable. Alan was very nervous. He was the only one among the 18 people who was so nervous that his palms were sweaty. He had also been through many battlefields. His temperament had been honed, and he wouldn't have stage fright. The reason why Alan was nervous now was because he could not help but worry about these people. These were not the relatively simple youths he usually reported on. These people before him were either the former pride of the military academy, or the descendants of the 8 great marshals or the Heavenly Edict Empire. These people clearly could have received the best protection, but they had still risked their lives to come to a place like this. This was truly admirable to him. This was also why Alan had rejected his father's arrangements and come here on his own. What would a true star of tomorrow look like? Alan felt that it should be like these people before him. After organizing their equipment, the people looked at the map and the route displayed on the big screen one last time before stretching their necks and arms a little. When Feng Haichao was stretching his neck, he turned around and saw Cheto standing next to Silan. He let out a surprised ugh. Silan and Cheto were standing at the back, so no one noticed Cheto's strange behavior at first. However, after they heard Feng Haichao's voice that was filled with astonishment and pitch change, everyone turned around to look. What are you doing, Feng Haichao? You. Fuck me. Cheto, don't you need to wear a protective suit? Hey brother, listen to me and put it on. Other than C.I. Jincheng, Knight, Lung, and a few others who knew the truth, everyone else was staring at Cheto like they had seen a ghost. There was actually someone who hadn't put on a protective suit at such a tense time, and he didn't even bring much equipment with him. If this was the military, he would definitely be punished, and even his mission qualification would be revoked. Cheto looked at them and said calmly, I don't need that. The others looked at Silan, C.I. Jincheng, and the others' reactions and didn't say anything else. The countdown was almost over, and they didn't have the time to pay attention to Cheto. Everyone had their own secrets, and if he didn't want to wear it, then so be it. On the ground, in the city where the pharmaceutical factory was located, the houses that weren't tall were already in a state of devastation. Red, black, and brown blood was everywhere. There were mutilated corpses of dead humans as well as those of biochemical beasts. Shrouded in a faint mist of medicine, there were all kinds of animal-like roars, human shouts, and gunshots. Mixed together with this strange and colorful blood-stained background, it was exceptionally terrifying. The people hiding in the alleys were fighting against the biochemical beasts whose whereabouts were uncertain. This was a battle of survival, and the loser would die. 3 people hiding in a corner of a dilapidated 2-story building were conversing in low voices. They paid careful attention to the situation outside while they were talking. There were 2 human corpses and a biochemical beastman's corpse lying in the courtyard. There were all kinds of blood everywhere. Crack crack, not far away, a large man jumped out of a nearby corner and covered the underground passage. Then, he smeared some of the biochemical beastman's blood on the surrounding area and removed the human aura in this place. How is it? The people who were discussing earlier asked. They've started retreating. We need to hold those things off for half an hour, the large man said with a smile. If they could hold them off for half an hour, their chances of survival would be close to zero. There were only 4 of them in this place, and there were more than 20 biochemical beastmen coming their way. Perhaps it was because they smelled the scent here, or maybe it was because the biochemical beastman's cry before he died had attracted the biochemical beastmen from other places. The 4 of them needed to greet the monsters here and divert their attention in another direction. Their wives and children were in the underground tunnel. Under the protection of another group of people, they would leave the town through the underground tunnel to find shelter in other directions. Although it would not be very safe outside, at least it would be better than this place. In the past, living close to the pharmaceutical factory was something to brag about. That was because the closer they were to the pharmaceutical factory, the better the treatment they received. They would often receive free medicine. But now, such a geographical location had put them in a difficult situation, and they would be the first to be attacked by the monsters. There were no living people in the area closer to the pharmaceutical factory. Hiss. A middle-aged man who was on guard hissed. The other 3 people's expressions changed. They immediately picked up their guns and leaned against the wall, carefully looking out through some gaps. Bang! There was an explosion outside, indicating that one of the biochemical beast men had fallen into a trap that they had set in advance and was killed. However, because of this explosion, the other biochemical beast men were also revealed. Their ruthless eyes looked around, and then they rushed toward the courtyard. Fuck, we've been discovered, a large man complained. The biochemical beastmen's visual organs were very special. They did not just rely on color to determine their targets. Da-da-da-da. The sound of guns firing could be heard. However, the biochemical beastmen were moving too fast, and it was impossible to aim at them. Even if they were to shoot, it was difficult to hit the vital parts. For the biochemical beastmen, it was just an insignificant wound. The biochemical beastmen were getting closer and closer. In the faint fog, their figures became clearer and clearer, and they were getting closer and closer to the small courtyard. There was more than one. There were 10, no, more than 20 of them, and they were now gathering in the small courtyard. Let's go. Lure them elsewhere, the leader said while shooting. The main purpose of their shooting was to attract the attention of the monsters. With their abilities and equipment, it was quite difficult to kill a biochemical beastman. Retreat. The 4 people quickly turned around and ran to the window behind them. They jumped out of the window, but they did not immediately run away. Instead, they fired behind them as they ran. After making sure that the biochemical beastmen did not notice the entrance of the underground passage and were chasing them, the 4 people began to run away. However, they were still no match for the biochemical beastmen. The pursuers behind them were getting closer and closer, and in front of them, there was a 3-meter-tall big guy blocking their way. The biochemical beastman's protruding mouth was like a big starfish when it opened. They did not even have time to raise their guns before the big mouth bit toward them. The 4 people could already smell the blood coming from the big mouth. Whoosh, bang. Their heads exploded, and the 4 people who were closest to them were all splattered with blood. The splattered blood dyed the surroundings a brownish-red color, and the 3-meter-tall body collapsed. What? What's going on? The person at the front swallowed his saliva. Before he could react, there were continuous banging sounds around him. It was the same sound of heads exploding just now. They turned around and saw the biochemical beastmen that were chasing them collapse one by one. Due to the fog, they could not see who was shooting. They only knew that biochemical beastmen were continuously collapsing, and their heads were basically exploding. Killed in one shot. Who? Who came? They did not know. In the sky, an aircraft was flying at a low altitude. There were people wearing protective suits standing on the landing board. These people were fully armed, and they could not see what they looked like. However, they could tell that they looked like normal people. After all, besides humans, there were only biochemical beast men here. Chapter 4:11. The low-flying spaceplane flew past the residential area, and the bullets it fired caused the surrounding biochemical beasts to fall one after another. Some of the biochemical beasts who saw the spaceplane jumped up using their own high-jumping ability, spread their slender arms and side-like claws, and swung them at the people standing on the sloping landing boards. However, their heads exploded in the air just after they jumped up, and their brains splattered everywhere, adding another layer of eeriness to the colorful street. The biochemical beasts that jumped into the air were shot down continuously, and some of the winged ones didn't fare any better either. Following the sounds of their heads exploding, they fell to the ground like raindrops. The people who were standing on the ground and hiding in the corners of other buildings were dumbfounded. They didn't know who the newcomers were, but their combat strength was enough to send chills down their spines. No matter how strong a person was, they were still human, and they had weaknesses. These biochemical beasts were no exception. If they couldn't hit their vitals, then no matter how many shots they fired, they might not necessarily be able to kill them. However, if they could hit their vitals, then it would be a completely different story. The residents of this street had once imagined the possibility of killing these biochemical beasts in one shot, but reality forced them to face a cruel situation, and they gradually demonized these biochemical beasts in their hearts. They never expected a planetary government because there was no such thing here. The people who were originally in charge of the pharmaceutical factory were the rulers of this planet, but after the pharmaceutical factory shut down and was abandoned, everyone was abandoned just like that, and turned into food for these monsters. The situation in front of them gave them hope once more. Bang bang bang. Some packages fell from the sky, and one of them landed right in front of the 4 people from before. For the time being, there were no living biochemical beasts around them. Their corpses were everywhere. The spaceplane had already flown past them, and they didn't know where the spaceplane was flying to. The package in front of them couldn't possibly be a bomb, could it? Moving his still trembling legs, the leader sucked in a deep breath and walked towards the package. When he opened the package with trembling hands, he saw that it was filled with firearms and some mini grenades. As if to make it easier for them to see, there was also an instruction manual inside the package that was written in Sector R's language and the League of Stars' common language. Even though Lung and the others didn't think much of these firearms, to these residents, it was already much better than the weapons they were holding in their hands that were almost about to retire. These firearms were relatively easy to operate and were easy to learn. Although there were some limitations, they brought great benefits to the residents. The people on the aircraft did not have the time to care about what the residents below thought. They followed the plan. After flying into the city, the aircraft would lower its altitude and kill some bioorcs. At the same time, they would warm up. Biochemical beasts kept coming out of the pharmaceutical factory. Some were small, some were big. Looks like these bioorcs haven't been out for more than 24 hours, Kong Man said. However, it had only been 24 hours for this street and this planet to be reduced to such a state. It was obvious how serious the situation was. Gradually, they arrived at the edge of the pharmaceutical factory. There was a circular open space here. The wide transport channel that was built on it was now full of cracks and uneven. Rocks from explosions and some equipment from the pharmaceutical factory were everywhere. Apart from that, there were also some mutilated corpses of biochemical beasts and humans. Why did they say that they were mutilated? Many little biochemical beast men kept jumping out from beneath the pharmaceutical factory and feasting on the corpses. Regardless of whether they were human or biochemical beast men, or even biochemical beast men that looked exactly like them or were related to them, they were all food for these little fellows that seemed to have just been born. The spaceplane did not land. First, they had to clear out the biochemical beasts around the designated spot so that they could carry out their next operation. They couldn't use a powerful bomb. If there was any important information left underground, the bomb might destroy it. I'm heading over first. The moment he said this, Hui Mao jumped down from the spaceplane with a whoosh. He was the vanguard, and his current mission was not to deal with the biochemical beasts, but to check out the situation underground. If there was no information, he might as well just throw a nuclear bomb at the area. Originally, Kong Man and the others were worried about whether Hui Mao was up to the task. In the end, after Hui Mao's shadow flashed and rushed down, he saw some biochemical beasts being pierced through. They were the ones that were blocking Hui Mao's way. Hui Mao did not want to go around them, so he rushed in a straight line, which resulted in some of the biochemical beasts being pierced through. Kong Man raised his eyebrows and stopped worrying about the cat. Kong Man would deal with the information that Hui Mao sent over. Kong Man looked at the information that Hui Mao had sent over and said, "There are no living humans over there. They are all biochemical beasts." There were interference facilities around the area. Only by entering the area would they be able to investigate the specific situation. Now, Hui Mao had brought some signal detectors into the area and placed them in different places. It had to be said that Hui Mao's reminder and flexibility had brought great convenience to everyone. The detectors are in place. "We can proceed to the next step," Kong Man said. After everyone replied, Kong Man lowered the aircraft, and the people standing on the landing boards jumped down one after another. They were divided into 2 groups, each with 8 people. When the first group jumped down, the second group was responsible for covering them and clearing out the biochemical beasts that ran over. When the first group stabilized and started clearing the surroundings, the second group jumped down. The group moved towards the pharmaceutical factory in a formation. The first round of cleanup had left a layer of biochemical orc corpses in the surrounding area. The number of biochemical orcs in this small area had been greatly reduced, so there wasn't much pressure on them now. There was basically no need for close combat. The bullets stopped the biochemical beasts at a distance of 50 meters. Sillin was still using the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. At first, no one noticed it. When they realized that Sillin had missed his target a few times and several of his targets had fallen at the same time, they realized that something was wrong. Compared to the guns everyone else was holding, Sillin's gun was way too small. However, it wasn't any weaker in terms of destructive power. In fact, it was even stronger. Cheto was the only exception among the group. Not only was he not wearing a protective suit, he wasn't carrying a gun either. Instead, there were some crescent-shaped metal plates floating around him. These metal plates would shoot at any bioweapons that approached him at high speed and cut open the bioweapons' heads immediately. Cheto controlled the metal plates. When there were no more biochemical beasts in the area, some of the metal plates returned to his body and melted into his body. Yu Lu and the others couldn't stop their eyes from twitching. Is he really a human? Or is he some kind of strange species of human? What the meow? There are so many balls down there. Hui Mao's voice rang in everyone's communicators at the same time. Then, Hui Mao transmitted what he was seeing to everyone. On the screen, in the beehive-shaped building, there was an unhatched embryo above each small hole. Some were hard-shelled eggs, and some were artificial embryos. However, they were wrapped in a layer of translucent or opaque membrane. The membrane pulsated, just like the heartbeat of the creature inside. A small biochemical beast man broke out of the eggshell and crawled out. There were some protruding spikes on its back, and its body was covered in hard armor. Its eyes were as cold as a lizard's, and there was some mucus on its newly hatched body. However, it didn't look weak at all. In fact, it looked very energetic. After he saw the gray cat, he opened his mouth and let out a hoarse and stifling cry that sent chills down one's spine. Then, he pounced towards the gray cat with incredible speed. At the very least, he was faster than the big guys that Sillin and the others had dealt with along the way. However, its opponent was Hui Mao. Hui Mao pressed the charging creature under his feet with a claw and exerted force. Then, he stomped through the creature's body, and when he saw that it was still struggling, Hui Mao stomped a few more times. "It's a bit harder than the big guys from before," Hui Mao said. Sillin and the others exchanged a glance with each other. They had a bad feeling about this. They couldn't be bothered to deal with the big biochemical beast men anymore. They had to get to Huimao's side immediately. Kong Man passed some cryo guns and super high-temperature jet tubes to Silen and the others. These things would be useful in that honeycomb-shaped underground place. Based on the pattern detected by the detector, Silen and the others dug a big hole that led underground. When they got through, a few small biochemical beast men jumped out from the hole, brimming with murderous intent. After Silen chopped the fellow with two long fangs that pounced at him in half, the other half of the biochemical beast man could still move. Moreover, it sprayed two streams of poison at Silen. Silen dodged it, and the place where Silen was originally standing had two holes corroded into the wall. As the poison slid down, two traces of corrosion appeared on the wall, and a sizzling sound could be heard. The attack only stopped when Silen split open the creature's head. Be careful. Don't let these guys get close. Attack the head. These newly hatched fellows seem to be getting more and more complicated. Knight pulled out the knife that was nailed to the wall and flung away the newly hatched biochemical beast man that had its head pierced through. We need to speed up our progress. This is a huge underground incubation room. If there's an incubation room like this somewhere else, then we'll be in big trouble when these new generation biochemical beast men hatch. C.I. Jincheng said. The group walked quickly towards Huimao's location. There weren't many newly hatched little biochemical beasts right now, and if they waited until the peak of the incubation period arrived, it would be difficult for them to get out even if they wanted to. The explosion of the pharmaceutical factory did not damage this underground place. It looked like a mess and was full of waste, but that was only limited to the surface. This underground place was still very well preserved. However, many of the instruments had been moved away. The people here must have moved them along when they retreated, and those that couldn't be moved were directly destroyed. No one would be able to obtain the data and information inside these instruments. When Silen arrived at the beehive-like incubation room, Huimao was raising his front claws and pinning a biochemical beast man that had just broken out of its membranes to death. These newly born biochemical beast men looked more like beasts in appearance, but their intelligence was obviously higher than the big guys they had encountered before. This was the most troublesome part. The biochemical beast man that Huimao had pinned to death just now knew how to ambush. When the first two biochemical beast men were pouncing towards Huimao, he was looking for an opportunity at the side. Although he was still pinned to death in the end, he was a much bigger threat to these biochemical beast men who already possessed higher intelligence. C.I. Jincheng led the four of them to look at other places and search for the remaining information on the instruments. Silen nodded at Cheto, and the latter no longer paid attention to this huge incubation room. He and C.I. Jincheng went to see if they could repair some of the data and information. Alan, write it down. These are all evidence. Lung said to Alan, who was on the spaceplane outside, through the communicator. Alan was able to receive the images they sent over. These would all become incriminating evidence for the miracle that was going to be revealed to the public soon. Amen, I know. Don't worry. Alan's hands never stopped moving. He had been busy organizing the information ever since he arrived here. It would seem that the big biochemical beast men from before were just coolies who went out to take care of trouble and hunt their prey so that they could provide food for the little biochemical beasts that were about to hatch. Motherfucker. Knight cursed at the incubation lair. At the same time, he started shooting at the unhatched eggs with his freeze gun. The white beam shot at the unhatched eggs, and the surface of the eggs swiftly froze. This won't do, it's still too slow. Why don't we just set them on fire? Knight said. This kind of freezing speed was still too slow for such a huge incubation room. The high-temperature spray tubes weren't very effective either. This incubation room was built with special materials that were resistant to cold and heat. Even if the weapons were effective, the efficiency wasn't high. The little biochemical beasts were hatching faster and faster, so they could deal with them easily for now. Silen patted Knight, who was starting to lose his temper. I'll do it. Silen informed the others to put on their protective suits through the communicator. Then, he took out a gun that Knight and Pride had never seen before. Huimao knew this. After seeing Sillin take out the gun, especially after seeing the type of bullets Sillin had loaded, Hui Mao didn't care about the toy over there anymore and hurriedly retreated to Sillin's side. The others followed Sillin's orders and retreated outside. They didn't want to come into contact with the huge incubation room. After loading the bullets, Sillin raised his hand and fired at the incubation room. There were light popping sounds, but the visual impact made the others speechless, especially Lung. When he saw the effects of Sillin's bullets, his pupils shrunk, and then he smiled. He didn't think that Sillin would find the answer so quickly. Lung and Sillin had gone to Sea Paradise together. The sea beast crystals lying in the undersea city were still vivid in his mind. Lung had been wondering about the production method of those crystals, and his subordinates had analyzed the uniqueness of those crystals with him later on. It was because of this that Lung paid extra attention to them. He didn't think that he would see such a scene today. On the other side, C.I. Jincheng and his men were trying to repair information from a destroyed synthesizer when they suddenly realized that the medicine inside the broken medicine bottles around them were drying up rapidly. The few biochemical beasts that were killed just now were starting to shrivel up and turn into dried corpses. In the eyes of C.I. Jincheng and the others, this biochemical beast man was changing at an extremely fast speed. His muscles looked like they were withering, his skin and flesh were shriveled, sunken and stuck close to his bones. Every step he took seemed to accelerate the drying process. His dried and hardened skin tore apart as he ran, and the blood inside had dried up before it could even flow out. In the end, his body was so severely dehydrated that he could no longer move. A crescent-shaped metal piece beside Cheto flew towards him and cut him open. The dried bloodstains and flesh at the incision looked like a piece of jerky. A chill ran down C.I. Jincheng and the others' spines and went straight to their heads. What on earth happened? Oh right, Sillin told them to wear the protective suits just now, so this was what he meant. If they didn't wear the protective suits, they would probably be like that biochemical beasts that had turned into dried corpses right now. What is this? Feng Haichao asked beside C.I. Jincheng. Water bullet. Cheto withdrew the crescent-shaped metal piece and said calmly. Water bullet? They were puzzled. They had never heard of such a thing before. Children's toys had similar names though. Emen, you'll know when you get there later. Cheto did not say anything else and continued to search for data that could be repaired. Over at the incubator, Knight and the others stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. Some of the biochemical beasts that had just hatched or had broken their membranes were still clinging to the eggshells with their sharp claws. They glared fiercely at Sillin and the others' direction as if they would charge at them at any moment. Some of the biochemical beasts that had just broken their membranes were shaking and shaking off the mucus on their bodies, and so on. It was as if they had been frozen in place and covered by a layer of crystal-like substance. They themselves had become a part of the crystal-like substance, just like the ice of an Arctic zone. However, the temperature here did not change much, which meant that these things were not formed from ordinary ice. The incubator that contained thousands of unhatched eggs was now a place that had been sealed by ice crystals. It retained all the appearances it had before it was sealed, including the cold and fierce gazes of the biochemical beasts that had just broken their shells before they could react. It was as if everything had been frozen at that moment in time. It was so vivid and lifelike. The water bullet Sillin used was one of the more destructive ones among the water bullets he currently had, and its crystallization effect was also a lot stronger. That was why the water vapor around it was forcefully absorbed so quickly. After looking at the enormous ice nest in front of him, Knight flicked the wrist blade in his hand towards the few biochemical orcs on the ground who weren't sealed after jumping out of the nest but were either dead or on the verge of death due to severe dehydration. Not a single drop of blood came out. It was as if he was cutting jerky. Knight was just about to express his opinion when he turned around and saw Whis holding a mummified biochemical beast man in its crooked paws. Then, it opened its mouth and bit into it, followed by the sound of crunching and chewing. It was an incredibly bizarre situation. Everyone. Chapter 412. Hui Mao tilted his head and chewed with gusto. The others didn't want to look anymore after a single glance. The scene sent chills down their spines. After glancing at the mummified biochemical orc, Knight shifted his gaze to the incubation nest covered in a layer of ice crystals. He tapped it with his wrist blade to test the waters before extending his hand to touch it. About 10 centimeters below where Knight's finger touched, there was a biochemical orc that had just broken out of its membrane with its mouth wide open as if it was going to pounce at him in the next moment. However, its nervousness was frozen by this layer of ice crystals. Knight was beyond amazed when he sensed the analysis information transmitted through the protective suit. These ice crystals were actually just water, but they didn't feel very cold. Moreover, through the analysis of the analyzer, Knight knew that the eggs in this incubation nest basically had no signs of life. The few eggs that were still alive had very weak signs of life and were extinguished in no time. Knight tested the dagger in his hand. He cut off a corner and looked at the biochemical orc that was contained in the cut. This time, there really wasn't a single sign of life. Crunching sounds rang in the air as Wheeze ran back to the frozen nest after finishing the jerky. Then, it opened its mouth and began to chew on the food. Knight knocked on the ice crystal he had cut off with his dagger. The force from his hand told him how hard this thing was, which was why he was even more impressed by Huemao's teeth and biting strength. The others were curious when they saw Knight cut off a piece. They flicked out their blades to take a look, curious as to what this thing was. Due to the effect of the water bomb, the water vapor in the surrounding area was forcefully absorbed. Many of the biochemical orcs that were swarming in this direction stayed far away. Those that could not avoid in time had a lot of water absorbed from their bodies, making them look a little shriveled. However, the biochemical orcs near the exit were not affected at all because there was a wide river next to the pharmaceutical factory and the humidity was high. However, this blank period wouldn't last long. Due to geographical reasons, in addition to the explosion of the pharmaceutical factory and the excavation of Sillin and the others, the underground laboratory had been unsealed. Moisture would seep in again. "Let's look at other places," Sillin said. The others who were having fun cutting acknowledged and threw away the hard pieces they had cut off. However, they kept some small pieces in their hands to study when they were free. None of this was hidden from Sillin, nor did they have any intention of hiding it. After they were done dealing with things here, they walked over to where Ci Jincheng and the others were. That place used to be some experimental workshops, and they could see many dried corpses along the way. Those were the dried corpses that Ci Jincheng and the others had killed and then forcefully absorbed water to form. They had seen it before, so Knight and the others were no longer surprised when they saw it again. "What do you think? Did you find anything?" Sillin asked. Ci Jincheng waved a device in his hand. "The data we can repair is limited, but this trip was not in vain." Although he did not find any news about the dream taper, he had obtained quite a lot of information about the biochemical orcs. The biggest threat at the current stage was indeed the dream taper. However, nobody could tell if there would be more disasters like this after the dream taper. There should be many underground incubation lair in some of Miracle's bases. Puff! A metal piece flew out from Cheto's side and nailed an animal that looked like a four-legged snake to death. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't find it strange. Cheto had already killed a couple of these animals here. Although they weren't biochemical orcs, they could have been animals from this lab in the past. Therefore, they weren't too puzzled by Cheto's actions. However, Sillin sensed that something was wrong. He sensed a strange signal wave before he even entered the planet. After he arrived here, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Moreover, he felt that someone was watching over everything here. Those animals were strange. It was only after Cheto killed them that the feeling of being watched in Sillin's heart decreased a little. "What's wrong?" Lung asked. "I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching us," Sillin answered. "Now that you mention it, it is a little. However, I'm definitely not the one being watched." Lung crossed his arms and scratched as if he was rubbing goosebumps. If someone was watching him from the shadows, Lung would have noticed it himself. Right now, the feeling of being watched wasn't that strong, so it was obvious that the person behind him wasn't paying attention to him. Lung was certain of this. There's someone else. The others exclaimed in surprise and looked around vigilantly. C.I. Jincheng didn't see any other humans through the life signature scan on his protective mask. There were only some scattered biochemical orcs and other small animals. However, Silin Helong definitely had his reasons for saying so. There must be someone watching them from the shadows. Was it someone from Miracle? Or was it someone else? Silin looked around and said, let's not worry about that for now. After we're done gathering information here, we'll go check if there are similar underground incubators in other places. If there are, we'll take them out immediately. Amen, this is indeed a top priority. C.I. Jincheng looked at the information Kong Man sent back. An aircraft had crashed on this planet in the past 2 days, and it was probably from the Central Transit Star. However, there was no virus spread, so it was possible that the people who came here weren't infected. It was also possible that they had been taken care of. In short, there were no signs of virus spreading, but there were definitely battles happening in other places. Let's go out and blow this place up. The other 2 large pharmaceutical factories must have some secrets. C.I. Jincheng put away the instruments in his hands and returned along the road. When they saw that frozen incubator, C.I. Jincheng and the others were also stunned. Combining the scene before them with what they saw earlier, it was impossible for them not to be shocked. Right now, Hui Mao was still clinging to it and gnawing on it. However, since they were in a hurry, they didn't stay for long. Silin twisted Hui Mao off the frozen incubator and waited for night to install the bomb before they quickly retreated. Without the biochemical orcs to continue incubating, the new generation of biochemical orcs wouldn't be able to reproduce so quickly. Right now, the number of biochemical orcs was 1 by 1, and there wouldn't be any new ones for the time being. This did reduce a lot of pressure. After they retreated from the underground lab, Kong Man had already flown the aircraft over after receiving the notice and descended above the pharmaceutical factory. They still split into 2 groups, one group to cover, the other to jump onto the landing boards. Some of the surrounding biochemical orcs saw the scene and gathered over. However, after Silin and the others jumped onto the landing boards, the aircraft started pulling up. Knight raised his finger and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Explode. Boom. A huge explosion sounded. It started from the underground lab and blew up some of the rocks on the surface of the Earth's crust. When the explosion spread out, the biochemical orcs that ran over couldn't escape at all and were sucked into the explosion and blown to smithereens. The entire pharmaceutical factory was now truly uprooted from the roots. The frozen incubator was also reduced to ashes in this explosion. The people hiding in the residential area saw the scene and felt hope rise in their hearts again. They knew that the biochemical orcs came from there, but they couldn't get close at all. Even if they did, the people who risked their lives to get there couldn't find the biochemical orcs' nests. This explosion had greatly reduced the gloom in their hearts. Let's go to the next pharmaceutical factory. The people who entered the aircraft looked at the other 2 large pharmaceutical factories on the screen and the reports sent back by the detectors. There weren't a large number of biochemical orcs there, only a small number of biochemical beasts. Then there were the battles between local forces. We didn't detect any signal from the incubator. There might be signal interference too. But where should we go next? These 2 pharmaceutical factories are still quite far away from each other, Kong Man said. The 3 largest pharmaceutical factories were located in 3 different places on the planet, forming a tripartite balance. However, it was unknown whether all 3 of these pharmaceutical factories were supported by Miracle, but it was true that these 3 pharmaceutical factories had once ruled the planet. This one, Silin pointed at one of the factories and said, let's go to this factory first. I think we'll find something. Kong Man looked at C.I. Jincheng. C.I. Jincheng nodded. If no one else has any objections, then let's go to this factory first. The others didn't care. They didn't know the difference between the 2 factories anyway. However, the battles in the areas where these 2 factories were located were pretty intense. Even the internal battles were in full swing, and they weren't affected by the biochemical orcs here at all. But if the new biochemical orcs hatched from the underground incubator and spread to the other side, it would be too late for them to fight back. The pharmaceutical factory that Scylla had pointed out looked more thoroughly destroyed than the other two, but Scylla could sense a strange signal coming from it. He wanted to go and see what was going on. He had a feeling that he would definitely gain a lot this time. The destruction over there was more complete, but the battle over there was quite intense. It didn't lose to the people in the other two places at all. What are they fighting over? Pride asked. The area where the pharmaceutical factory was located was already so destroyed, but the forces there were still fighting over that territory. They knew the situation over there from some of the intercepted communications. The three forces were fighting over the ruined pharmaceutical factory. The problem was, what was there to fight over in a pile of ruins? There must be some secret down there. From those people's communications, we only know that there's also a base down there. They think that there must be some flying tools down there, that's why they're fighting so desperately. Ci Jincheng explained to everyone, since the management of the pharmaceutical factory had taken away all the flying tools that could leave the planet when they left, the people here can only attack that underground base if they want to take refuge outside without flying tools. There's really flying tools down there. The others were puzzled. Ci Jincheng shook his head, I don't know. There's a barrier around the pharmaceutical factory, so we'll only know when we get there. But one thing is for sure, there's definitely a secret down there. We just don't know what it is. Those people couldn't find the secret down there no matter how hard they fought. Scylla asked curiously. Before they figured it out, they forbade anyone from stepping foot into the pharmaceutical factory. However, they mentioned that thing in their communications. I don't know what this word means. Ci Jincheng looked at the information in his hands and said. Scylla thinks for a moment, then let's drag a few people over and interrogate them first. After all, we won't get much substance even if we steal communications. We might as well drag a few key personnel over and interrogate them. Makes sense, I agree. Knight preferred direct methods like this. Drag who? Pride asked. If we're going to drag the leader, of course. The spaceplane flew towards the pharmaceutical factory that Scylla had mentioned. Meanwhile, the battle there was still going on. The three forces had never stopped fighting each other for a single moment. On a mountain near the city cluster where the pharmaceutical factory was located, inside a building that could be considered luxurious compared to the buildings here. Boss, those people snuck towards the pharmaceutical factory again today. If we hadn't discovered them early, they probably would have succeeded. A young man said angrily inside the office. A middle-aged man sat behind a square table in front of the young man. He listened to his subordinate's report with his hands crossed and rubbed the ring on his thumb. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment as he listened to his subordinate's report. Then, he waved his hand and said solemnly, if they sneak in again and ignore the rules, don't do anything and let them go. You guys just follow behind. You're saying, if they're in a hurry, then let them deal with that monster first. They all want to be the fisherman who benefits from the fight, but none of them have the patience. We might as well wait and let them go first. The young man was a quick-witted person. He immediately understood the middle-aged man's words. I understand. I'll instruct them now. Seeing that the middle-aged man did not say anything else, he excused himself and closed the door. After the young man left, the middle-aged man sitting on the chair frowned and thought for a moment. Then, he let out a long sigh and got up to walk to the wall next to him. He pressed his palm against a spot and a light flashed on it. Then, he pulled the wall up from the bottom. On the other side of the wall was a warehouse. There was a small aircraft in the warehouse. However, the aircraft was too small and could not accommodate many people. Moreover, the equipment was very simple and crude. It would be dangerous to travel long distances with it. According to the information he had received, the threat had already begun to spread on this planet. Outside this planet, there were virus disasters on other planets. No one knew what would happen to this planet in the next moment. Everyone wanted to find an aircraft to leave this place and find a new shelter. However, this was his route. It was the territory that they had worked hard to obtain for generations. It would be a waste to abandon all these resources and manpower. The middle-aged man caressed the aircraft. If the situation was really serious, he could only abandon everything here and leave. As he was thinking, the middle-aged man suddenly saw a shadow flash past the outer shell of the aircraft. Who is it? The middle-aged man quickly took out his gun and looked around vigilantly. However, he did not find anything unusual after looking around. However, when he turned to look at the aircraft again, he found a cat squatting on it. It was a gray, fat cat. The middle-aged man raised his gun and pointed it at Hui Mao. His face was twitching nervously. Perhaps it was because he knew some of the secrets of the pharmaceutical factory here. Compared to humans, those strange animals made him feel more threatened. Hui Mao did not react to the gun in the middle-aged man's hand. Instead, he opened his round eyes and looked at him quietly. Because the lighting in this place was dimmer, Hui Mao's pupils appeared larger. When it was curious, excited, or when it saw prey, its pupils would also dilate. These factors combined made the middle-aged man feel that this pair of eyes was particularly strange. It was not as calm and composed as it was in front of his subordinates. He did not shoot immediately. He was not sure of the origin of this cat. He knew that some animals should not be provoked. If they were provoked, there would be no way out. Therefore, with the middle-aged man's cautious personality, he only raised the gun and pointed it at Hui Mao. He did not pull the trigger. When he pointed at Hui Mao, he gradually retreated. When he retreated to the wall, he used his other hand to pat the wall, but his eyes were fixed on Hui Mao. The middle-aged man could feel the switch on the wall with his eyes closed, so he did not doubt that he had hit the wrong place. However, after a few pats, the wall did not respond at all. Cold sweat dripped from the middle-aged man's forehead. You. Where did you come from? Hui Mao ignored him. Seeing that Hui Mao did not respond, the middle-aged man looked for a few more exit switches. He even tried the switch that controlled the aircraft's takeoff port, which had not been used for many years, but it did not respond at all. All the exit switches had failed, and he was trapped there. Most importantly, this place was soundproof. The people inside could not hear the sounds outside. If there was a shooting inside, the people outside would not hear it either. Hui Mao was watching the middle-aged man in front of it, looking for a place to escape. It was so anxious that it was sweating profusely. It was squatting there calmly, enjoying the fun. Stop wasting time, a voice said. The voice wasn't loud, but it was very clear in this quiet place. This made the middle-aged man even more nervous than before. He looked around, but there was no one else. There were no alarms, no scanners, and no intruders. Who is it? Who is it? The middle-aged man shouted. He had just shouted when he discovered that the cat that was squatting on the aircraft had disappeared. Then, a shadow flashed by. The middle-aged man did not have the time to shoot at all, and he did not see it clearly at all. Thud. A muffled sound later, the middle-aged man collapsed. Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at the man on the ground. Then, he turned around and said innocently, I really didn't do it on purpose. I didn't think that this guy would be so weak. Does he have a concussion? Will he lose his memory? Will he turn into an idiot? Cheto gradually appeared in the direction Hui Mao was facing. After shooting a glance at the man on the ground, he said calmly, It's fine. Let's hurry and leave. It was Cheto who had urged Hui Mao to leave just now. This time, they were going to capture the leaders of the three forces and interrogate them. As the leader of the forces in this area, their defenses should be pretty good. At the very least, it was one of the better ones on this planet. However, it was really not enough for Silin and the others, not to mention Hui Mao and Cheto who were more familiar with these things. Cheto walked over and picked up the unconscious man on the ground like he was picking up a chicken. Then, he left. No one inside the building knew that their boss had been knocked unconscious and taken away. Chapter 4:13. When Romulos woke up, he realized that he was sitting on a chair. His hands and feet were trapped, and there were two people sitting on either side of him. Romulos was all too familiar with these two people. They had been fighting against each other since a long time ago, and as the leaders of the three great forces in the pharmaceutical factory area, they were trapped here as well. The three of them looked at each other speechlessly. However, they couldn't afford to offend someone who could easily capture them and bring them here. The less they spoke, the less mistakes they would make. They might as well save their energy to think about how to deal with what was going to happen next. The three of them knew each other very well, and it was obvious that they couldn't talk to each other just by looking at their expressions. Romulos looked at his surroundings. This place looked like a small room that was about 10 square meters in size. The decorations were simple, but not shabby. It was obvious that these were all high-tech products. Romulos's head still hurt a little. He remembered seeing that strange cat before he fainted. Whoosh, the door opened, and the people who walked in were all wearing protective suits. Their faces couldn't be seen, but their voices sounded very young, and their auras were very strong. Unlike the other two, Romulos's attention was focused on that Huimao. Right now, the fat cat was sitting on a person's shoulder and licking its paws. It looked very harmless. Yo, you guys woke up pretty fast, Lung said while looking at them. He was holding a syringe as thick as an arm and said regretfully, I was going to give you a shot if you guys didn't wake up. The faces of the three middle-aged men twitched. Wouldn't that syringe really kill someone? It looked like it was impossible to fake unconsciousness. They had come prepared. What do you want to know? One of the leaders of the forces asked. Silin and the others pulled over chairs and sat down. C.I. Jincheng was responsible for dealing with them, and Silin was writing and drawing on the electronic tablet in his hand. Lung and Knight looked at it, but they didn't understand it, so they stopped looking. A few questions. First, did anyone from another planet come over in the past 2 days? C.I. Jincheng asked. Yes, but they were taken care of. The man answered. Dealing with them meant killing them. According to the answers of these three people, Silin and the others learned that although this planet was not far from the transit planet and was not safe enough, there were still people who came here. It was just that as soon as they arrived, they were robbed and killed by the three factions in the area for their spaceships. What the three leaders lacked was aircrafts. Although they were reluctant to give up the territory they had conquered, having enough aircrafts was also a way of retreat and insurance. Since there were aircrafts coming their way, how could they not snatch them? Fortunately, the people who came from the transit planet were not infected, so they did not bring the virus with them. In addition, after learning about what happened on the transit planet, the three leaders became much more cautious. Every time there was an outsider, they would bring along some antivirus equipment. This planet had always been the world of pharmaceutical factories. Even if the three major pharmaceutical factories had collapsed, there were still plenty of drugs and disinfectants. No matter what, there had not been any cases of virus infection here, at least not until now. The three leaders did not know much about the biochemical beast men. That was in another area. They only knew that something had happened there, and that biochemical beast men had appeared. After learning of the biochemical beastmen's appearance, they built a defense line here, but they did not go over to help the people there. One reason was that they did not have a flying tool that could reach there quickly. Normal flying cars were too slow, a waste of time, and unreliable. The other reason was that they could barely take care of themselves here, and were too lazy to pay attention to the people in other areas. When C.I. Jincheng mentioned the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory in this area, the three leaders fell silent. However, after C.I. Jincheng took out the intercepted communication information and analyzed the situation for them, the three leaders finally reluctantly said something. There was a base below, and it was where the people from the pharmaceutical factory parked their transportation tools. When the people from the pharmaceutical factory left, they took away some of them, but not all of them. They felt that there must be more spaceships inside. The three leaders had spaceships on hand, but they were too small, and there were not many of them. They all wanted to get their hands on larger spaceships or transportation ships from the underground base. Transportation ships? Is the underground base that big? Pride sneered. I don't know exactly how big it is, but this underground base is definitely not small. Romulus said. Then what is that thing you're talking about? Or should I say, that monster? C.I. Jincheng asked again. The expressions of the three leaders changed when they heard this term. They seemed to have thought of something terrifying. Seeing that the three of them did not want to answer, Knight rubbed his fists and looked like he was about to start torturing them. The leaders of the three forces were calm. Actually, it doesn't matter if we say it or not. There are some things that everyone knows, and we're not the only ones who know. Celine and the others stopped what they were doing and listened to the words of the three leaders of power. They were very interested in that thing as well. They wondered what it was that could make these three leaders wary. We don't know what it is either. Maybe it's a strange product of those people's research, or maybe it's something else. However, according to our elders, there's a devil inside that base. A devil? Huemao's ears straightened and his eyes shone. Silen flicked Huemao's ear and told him to behave. Your elders? How long has that thing existed? Silen noticed this. I'm not sure, probably more than 70 years. We've heard stories about the devil inside that base since we were very young. More than 70 years. That was a really long time. Isn't that someone or something inside the pharmaceutical factory? C.I. Jincheng asked. The three shook their heads. It shouldn't be. I heard that people from the pharmaceutical factory have been there before. It's a huge warehouse, and there are transport planes and other flying tools there. However, many of them can't be flown anymore. All the electronic and mechanical equipment inside the warehouse can't be used, and there's no lighting. It's completely dark. Also, many people who went in said that there's a devil inside, a black devil. Some people tried to hunt it down, but the people from the pharmaceutical factory discovered that those people were dead the next day. All their bones were shattered, and it was a horrible sight to see. Didn't the people from the pharmaceutical factory think of cleaning it up? Knight asked. That warehouse's location is a little special, and it's not easy to make a move on it. If you're not careful, you'll destroy the workshop above the warehouse, and it'll be a huge loss. That's why the higher-ups of the pharmaceutical factory directly sealed the warehouse. After that warehouse was sealed, nothing strange happened in the pharmaceutical factory. Not long ago, before the collapse of the pharmaceutical factory, those people tried to open that warehouse, but none of them came out. Huemao's claws were starting to get restless again. He was very interested in those strange things. It was just like hide and seek, except that the identity of the target was unknown. The three leaders no longer hid the truth about that thing. Didn't they want to borrow Silen's hands to open the warehouse, defeat the devil inside, and then obtain those flying tools inside? Silen and the others understood this, but they didn't say anything. The three leaders didn't say anything like, tell us and you'll let us go, either. They knew that since the people in front of them had the ability to capture the three of them, even if they let them go, they could capture them again if they wanted to. Therefore, this was not a situation where they could negotiate. Moreover, based on the three leaders' judgment, they believed that these young people's target was not them, and they wouldn't waste too much energy on them. Therefore, since these strangers wanted to know about the pharmaceutical factory, and wouldn't fight with them for the flying tools, why not tell them? After understanding the situation at the pharmaceutical factory, the three of them were knocked unconscious and sent back. Silen looked at the ruins below the aircraft. He knew that the answer in his heart was in that warehouse. Romulus, who had been sent back safely, woke up to find himself sitting on a chair in the office. Romulus, who had woken up, picked up the herbal tea on the table and took a few gulps. He panted, then called a few of his confidants. Stop all operations at the other places and send people to keep an eye on the situation around the pharmaceutical factory. But don't act recklessly without my orders. Report to me if anything happens, Romulus said in a low voice. Although his confidants were a little puzzled by Romulus's sudden change of plans, they didn't ask any more questions when they saw the look on Romulus's face. Other than Romulus, the other two leaders did the same thing. The originally chaotic civil war had stopped. Perhaps it was because of the three leaders' influence, but the people of the three forces felt a strange sense of nervousness and anticipation. The aircraft arrived at the ruins of the pharmaceutical factory in stealth mode. Hui Mao was still the first to go down and set up the detector. Because of Silen's reminder, Hui Mao didn't run around. Although it really wanted to go to the warehouse and see what the devil inside looked like. The information about the pharmaceutical factory was quickly sent to the aircraft, and the layout of the underground base was displayed. This should be the warehouse they were talking about. C.I. Jincheng pointed at an empty area on the map because the detector that entered the pharmaceutical factory couldn't detect the situation there. Silen nodded. According to the signal, it was indeed in that direction. But other than these, there doesn't seem to be anything else. As for these, C.I. Jincheng pointed at the dim dots on the distribution map, their life signals aren't strong, so they shouldn't be anything difficult to get. However, although there aren't many living things inside, the underground base is filled with poisonous gas. We have to be careful, there are a lot of chemicals inside. Everyone, bring some neutralizing spray just in case. Silen and the others landed on the ruins together. Hui Mao had already dug a hole out of boredom. The hole led to the underground base. Knight and the others who had seen Hui Mao dig before were fine with it. C.I. Jincheng and the others looked at the hole, then at Silen before jumping down one after another. What C.I. Jincheng and the others meant was, this cat you're raising sure has many uses. The underground base was filled with all kinds of poisonous gas, and they had to be careful not to touch those bottles and cans when they walked. There was no telling what kind of medicine those bottles and cans contained. They couldn't look at the packaging of these medicines, because the contents inside were different from what was shown on the packaging. The underground base was filled with poisonous gas, so they couldn't see their way at all even if they turned on the lights. However, the visual windows on the protective masks could solve this problem. Through the fog, they could see the underground base clearly even in the dark. C.I. Jincheng took a look at the storage devices on some of the instruments. They were more seriously corroded, so how much they could be repaired would depend on luck. A colorful little snake was crawling at the corner of the laboratory table. Creatures that could endure this kind of environment and survive were all very lethal. They couldn't just look at its size. The little snake charged towards Pride, who was the closest to it. Pride's movements weren't slow either. He raised his hand and slashed downwards with his blade, directly cutting the snake in half. However, when the half-snake's body rolled to the side, the blood that flowed out was mixed with certain components in the air, making it even more corrosive. The result of the increased corrosion was that it corroded a reagent bottle there, and the liquid inside flowed out. Run! Silen realized that something was wrong after he heard the rustling sound of corrosion. The moment he shouted, everyone fled swiftly as well. In the next moment, the place where the half-snake's body was exploded with a bang. Although the scale of the explosion wasn't large, it caused quite a few consecutive explosions. There were more reagent bottles there, and the chain effect caused by one explosion took a long time to die down. Holy shit, this place really isn't fit for humans. I'd rather go deal with those biochemical beasts. Knight patted off the various debris that had fallen on his body. Pride also felt a wave of lingering fear. He didn't think that just half a snake's body could cause so many chain effects. This wasn't Pride's fault. This would have happened to anyone else. In this underground base that was filled with all kinds of gases, any change could cause an accident. This won't do. Silen took out a neutralization spray and tried spraying a bit of it at the surroundings. The colored or transparent gases were all absorbed by the neutralization spray and turned into powder that fell to the ground. This kind of powder was much more stable than the poisonous gases floating in the air. Let's spray some neutralization spray first. It'll save us some trouble later on, Silen said. The group sprayed the neutralization spray as they walked, and it did make the journey a lot easier. However, they had learned from the mistakes of the animals that would appear from time to time, so they were extra careful. Compared to the rest of the group, Cheto and Huimao were still a bit different in this line of work. They didn't wear protective suits or use breathing aids, and they didn't feel any discomfort even in such an environment. When they arrived at the core laboratories of the underground base, the rest of the group began to help C.I. Jincheng repair the information here. Silen looked around and said, "I'm going to take a look at the warehouse." "I'll go with you." Knight put down the instrument in his hand and said. Lung was about to follow as well, but Silen waved his hand and said, "It's fine. Cheto and Wheeze will be fine. There are some questions I want to find the answers to." Hearing Silen's words, Lung and Knight no longer insisted. They pointed at their communicators and said, "Contact me if you need anything. Also, tell us about the devil's true appearance." "All right." Silen made a reassuring gesture and led Cheto and Huimao towards the warehouse. "Just the three of them. Are you sure you'll be fine?" Pride asked. He thought that this place was dangerous enough to begin with, and with that devil added to the mix, could Silen, Cheto, and Wheeze really handle it? "Don't worry, Silen knows what he's doing." C.I. Jincheng looked up and said, "Also, don't underestimate him. There's still Cheto and that cat. They're all ruthless characters." Pride recalled Cheto and Huimao's performance during this period of time. Although he didn't show it on the surface, he admired them on the inside. He was also glad that they were on the same side right now, and not on the opposite side. But Silen really was a mystery. Silen was heading towards the warehouse. He didn't need to use the distribution map at all. He could track down the signal himself. "Are you sure you can't sense the signal?" Silen asked again. "No." Cheto and Huimao shook their heads at the same time. If they still couldn't sense it, then Silen was sure that the thing was coming for him. The closer they got to the warehouse, the stronger and more urgent the signal became. "What is it, Silen?" Huimao jumped onto Silen's shoulder. He was dissatisfied that he couldn't sense the signal that Silen could sense. However, Cheto didn't sense it either. This made Huimao feel a lot better. "I can't tell what it is exactly. It's like a greeting from someone I haven't seen for a long time. There's nothing too specific to say." Both Huimao and Cheto didn't quite understand Silen's explanation. While they were puzzled, Silen arrived in front of the warehouse. The warehouse door was tightly shut, and it looked like it had been closed for a long time. However, the marks on the ground proved that it had been opened recently and confirmed the three forces' words. Since they approached the warehouse, the lighting inside the base had gone out of control. They could feel the gloomy feeling coming from inside even before the door was opened. The warehouse door opened on its own before they could crack the password. The air inside was several degrees colder than outside, and it carried a trace of the smell of blood. Silen looked around and saw that there were some transport planes and a couple of not-so-big transport ships inside the warehouse. These transport planes and ships looked like they had been here for a long time. The three forces said that they had been here for more than 70 years, and Silen thought so too. The silence of the machinery was very strong. Walking inside, Silen saw a couple of corpses lying on the ground. They were probably killed when the warehouse was opened not long ago. Their faces were still filled with fear, but their bodies were sunken in, and their bones were all broken. There were no external injuries on their bodies, and the blood was flowing out of their nostrils and mouths. The warehouse was so quiet that even Huimao's tapping of his ears could be heard clearly. Silen walked past the corpses and continued forward. A couple of steps later, Silen looked up at the top of the warehouse. There was a person standing upside down against the top of the warehouse. He was completely silent. A man wearing a cloak. No, it wasn't a cloak, it was wings. The man had wrapped the wings around his body, so it looked like he was wearing a bamboo hat. Chapter 4:14. The warehouse was still dark, but Sillin was able to see the man clearly with the help of the protective mask and his special eyesight. If the man didn't speak, his presence would be very low. He had no killing intent, his breathing was almost inaudible, and his heartbeat was almost undetectable. There was no telling what he was going to do next. The dead people on the ground had obviously seen him before they died, or they wouldn't have looked so terrified otherwise. "Who are you?" Sillin asked. The person stuck to the roof of the warehouse did not answer Sillin. After a brief moment of silence, the feet that were stuck to the roof moved, and his entire body fell downwards. When he fell, he had already turned upside down and landed soundlessly on the ground. The man didn't spread his wings during the whole process. He felt light as a feather, but his speed wasn't slow at all. It was obvious that he was very familiar with the process. The man landed 10 meters away from Sillin, and he still looked like he was wearing a cloak. His height of more than 2 meters and his special cloak made him look very oppressive in this environment. He looked at Sillin, Huimao, and Cheto. He seemed to be very curious about them. His face was expressionless, and his gray eyes were completely emotionless. However, Sillin felt that he was actually excited and curious. He just didn't show it. Another strange silence ensued. Just as Huimao couldn't stand the silence any longer and was about to speak, the man moved. He opened the wings around him and retracted them to his back. His arms hung naturally at his sides, and his body was covered in a coat that looked like fur. He wasn't stepping on anything either. The first impression he gave off was, how black. His entire body was black, and his gray eyes looked even colder and more merciless than before. Of course, that was just how it looked. He didn't say anything, but Sillin could sense that the man's doubt seemed to have grown stronger. Sillin motioned Cheto and Huimao to move to the side and make space for the man. Cheto dragged the reluctant Huimao to the side and stood next to a transport plane. The man moved in the next moment. In a flash, he appeared in front of Sillin in the next moment, and the wings on his back flapped diagonally. Sillin did not dodge. He raised his hand to block the slap. Bang! It was like the sound of two hard metals colliding. As soon as the flap fell, the figure appeared behind Sillin again. It flapped its wings again, then to the left front, left back. With each strike, he changed his position and moved faster and faster. At first, it was still possible to see the figure after each strike, but gradually, only a black shadow could be seen flashing around Sillin. It was the flapping of wings, and the person himself was moving at such a high speed that it was difficult to see and gradually faded away. Bang! Bang! The sounds continued. Sillin did not move his feet. From beginning to end, he stood in his original position. However, the arms that blocked the wing attack seemed to have disappeared with the increasing speed of the attacks. Ordinary people would not be able to see it with their eyes. Half a minute later, the man stopped attacking and returned to a spot 10 meters away from Sillin. He stood still just like before. There was no panting, no panic. In fact, his aura was exactly the same as before. Mengchi arrow, the man said. This was the first thing the man said after he was done testing Sillin. His voice was a little deep, and it sounded a little dry and hoarse. Maybe it was because he hadn't spoken for a long time. Ah. Squatting impatiently on the spaceplane, Huimao looked puzzled by the man's words. Mengchi arrow, in the ancient language, it means holy light, Sillin said. He was explaining for Mengchi arrow, and also for Huimao and Cheto. Sillin. Sillin pointed at himself, Huimao and Cheto. Wheeze, Cheto. Wheeze. It's Wheeze. Huimao corrected him from the side. Wheeze is his nickname. Mengchi arrow looked at Huimao and seemed to be thinking about his nickname. Who are you? Sillin asked again, did you send that signal? Hearing Sillin's question, Mengchi arrow looked at Sillin again and said, yes. Then, there was silence. Sillin. It looks like this man really doesn't talk much. Why did he send that signal? Why couldn't anyone else sense or detect it? Sillin asked. Mengchi Arrow had no intention of hiding it. Because they don't have that chip. Sillin's eyelids twitched. It's the chip. Is it Hallie Hansen's chip? Yes. Were you forced to inject it as well? Yes. Huimao's beard shook again and again. It's so tiring to talk to this man. He's exactly the kind of guy who can't do anything but looks very serious. Fortunately, Mengchi Arrow answered him. But it was just a question and an answer. It was tiring just listening at the side. Do you have any information about Hallie Hansen? Sillin asked. Mengchi Arrow nodded and raised his hand. A projector on a transport plane projected the information. The information was very detailed and complete. From this information, Sillin learned Mengchi Arrow's origin. At the beginning, Mengchi Arrow wasn't called Mengchi Arrow. At the time, he was a biochemical beastman experiment subject and had only one experiment number. Hallie Hansen was a member of Miracle. Sillin had thought of this when he saw Mengchi Arrow. Seeing this information about Hallie Hansen, Sillin suddenly remembered a lot of things from the past, such as the situation when he was injected with the chip and escaped from the underground secret room. Some of the doubts buried in his heart were also answered. Hallie Hansen was an employee of the pharmaceutical factory and a member of the underground research base of Miracle. However, as an employee of Miracle, Hallie Hansen wasn't satisfied with this. He had an idea in his heart, and that was to carry out his own research. However, with Hallie Hansen's position in the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory, he couldn't have his own research project. He could only be an assistant and had to do whatever was ordered. Hallie Hansen, who wasn't satisfied with the status quo, had always wanted to appear in Glory and Code, the two electronic publications known as the history books of the League of Stars. Just like the influence of these two electronic publications in the League of Stars, Hallie Hansen also wanted to become a person admired by tens of thousands of people and wanted that kind of honor. However, Miracle didn't give him this opportunity. At the time, the person in charge of the underground base of the pharmaceutical factory was very disdainful of Hallie Hansen's idea and even mocked him. Not long after, Hallie Hansen quietly carried out his research, and the experimental subjects that the research institute needed were the biochemical beastman experiment subjects. However, the failure rate of the experiment was too high, and he stole many experimental subjects without the consent of the person in charge. In the end, he was discovered. Hallie Hansen fled from the pharmaceutical factory where the biochemical beastman laboratory was located and created a mess. While everyone was busy paying attention to the workshop, Hallie Hansen stole a small aircraft from this warehouse. He couldn't steal a large aircraft, and it was difficult to pilot it, so in the end, he could only pilot a small aircraft. Because the capacity of the small aircraft was limited, Hallie Hansen threw down some things that he didn't think were important, including Mengchi Arrow, who had just been injected with the chip and was classified as a failed experimental subject. This was because when Hallie Hansen arrived at this warehouse, his heart stopped beating. When Hallie Hansen piloted the aircraft and left, before the people of this underground warehouse came to check, Mengchi Arrow woke up. At that time, his chip had been stimulated by more than 90%, which was something that Hallie Hansen had never expected. After that, Mengchi Arrow lived in this dark warehouse. Because this underground warehouse was only a backup warehouse, there were other warehouses above ground for transporters and cargo spaceships, so there were very few people coming here. Plus, with Mengchi Arrow's ability to hide, he wasn't discovered. Later, when someone wanted to use the transporter in the underground warehouse, they found that it couldn't be used. At that time, Mengchi Arrow was discovered, and those people shot at him, and the result can be imagined, none of those people survived. Later, when a group of people came to check, Mengchi Arrow didn't come out and hid in a cargo spaceship. All the transporters and spaceships in this warehouse couldn't fly, because when the chip was stimulated, all the flying tools and operating systems here were destroyed, and the warehouse's monitoring equipment and other lighting equipment suffered the same result. When the people came to check again, they couldn't find the reason. At that time, several senior executives of the pharmaceutical factory were fighting for management rights, and this warehouse's problem was also explained by other reasons, which became the reason why those people fought and attacked each other. Later on, when the pharmaceutical factory's management changed, the flying tools in this warehouse were no longer used. Moreover, there were some important workshops above the warehouse, and the managers were afraid that they would be caught if something went wrong, so they suppressed it again and again. However, since then, the employees had been secretly spreading rumors that there was a devil in the underground warehouse. When the person in charge of Miracle discovered that Hallie Hansen had been secretly stealing experimental subjects to carry out his own experiments and learned that a few excellent experimental subjects had been crippled, the person in charge was furious and had sent people to hunt him down. According to the information given by Monchi Arrow, Miracle had blown up Hallie Hansen's aircraft, and in Miracle's records, Hallie Hansen was a dead man. Silen didn't know how Hallie had deceived the eyes of Miracle's people here, but he thought that Hallie Hansen must have packed his things and ran to planet Brown Earth in Sector X, built an underground laboratory, and carried out his experiments carefully. He wasn't afraid of the people of planet Brown Earth, but the people of Miracle. However, the people of planet Brown Earth generally had low genes, and their physiques couldn't compare to those excellent experimental subjects, so their progress was slow. That was why Hallie had spent so many years experimenting, and it was only when Silen appeared that the chip he was upgrading finally came into play. Hallie thought that the experimental subject, Monchi Arrow, was already dead, but he didn't expect that after he abandoned Monchi Arrow here, the experimental subject that was determined to be a failure would succeed after that. Moreover, he had been living in this warehouse all this time, and would only go out to hunt when he was hungry without being discovered. Hallie Hansen had escaped to that underground base on planet Brown Earth for more than 70 years. 70 years. If he knew that he had succeeded more than 70 years ago, how would he feel? If Hallie Hansen had brought Mengchi Arrow along with him on the spaceplane at that time, then Silen definitely wouldn't have existed after that. Maybe Hallie Hansen's name really could have appeared in the Glory and Code 70 years ago. One had to admit that Hallie Hansen was truly a capable person. Although it was different from what Silen had thought at the beginning, that the chip was made here and brought over, and not made on planet Brown Earth, Silen still admired Hallie Hansen. It wasn't just because he made this chip and changed Silen's life, there were other reasons as well. Ever since Silen had escaped death, his heart had always been filled with doubts. But now, it seemed that Hallie Hansen still had a trick up his sleeve. Silen admitted that he had lost to Hallie Hansen. He clearly remembered that in that underground secret room, after he killed Hallie Hansen, the electronic synthesized voice that sounded from the mechanical instrument said, "Master is dead. Beginning program purge." Why did the purge program need to prompt him? Moreover, every message that was about to be purged would flash on the screen. If he really didn't want to be discovered by others, setting up such a purge mode would be too much of a waste of time. Also, there was a 5-minute program purge, and the next 5 minutes were used to execute the program to destroy, the countdown to desertification. The doors in the underground secret room were all open, and there was no obstruction. The scene that seemed to have been deliberately arranged reappeared in Silen's mind. The 5 minutes of calculation allowed Silen to crawl out from the vent. Everything was within Ori Hansen's plan. Although Ori Hansen might not have thought that Silen would be the one to escape after his success, Silen couldn't help but admit that Ori Hansen had arranged everything very well. Moreover, he was crazy enough to even calculate the time of his own death. Why did he let the successful experiment come out? Maybe Hallie Hansen didn't take in that message at the time, or maybe Silen didn't see it. After all, time was too tight at the time, and Silen didn't pay attention to the information of some other instruments. Or maybe the instrument wasn't placed on the test bench Silen was lying on in the first place. In short, Silen had missed that message. The projection in front of him displayed a star map, a detailed star map at that. The star map wasn't complete, and there were only a few sectors around Sector R that were lagging behind. However, the information on it was impossible to ignore. It was the distribution map of Miracle's other bases. More than 70 years ago, or perhaps even earlier, Hallie Hansen had drawn out the distribution map of those hidden research bases. At the time, Miracle was still that powerful corporation with a powerful backer. Sillin raised his hand and unfolded the star map. He found the planet's location and the pharmaceutical factory that was marked on the map. Below it was Miracle's research base. This and the other pharmaceutical factory could only be said to be in a cooperative relationship with Miracle. They didn't belong to Miracle. Cheto had already copied all the information while Sillin was flipping through the information, so there was no need for Sillin to copy it again. Hallie Hansen wanted revenge, and these were some of the distribution maps of Miracle that he knew of. Those people had stopped him from appearing on the 2 top magazines and obtaining glory, so Hallie Hansen bore a grudge against them. His successful experiment was the sharpest weapon for revenge, and it was also the proof that he, Hallie Hansen, was in no way inferior to some of the people in charge of Miracle. Sillin was one of them, and Menji Arrow, looking at the person in front of him, Sillin didn't know what kind of attitude he should use to face him. Monkey Arrow didn't have any malicious intentions towards Sillin. Perhaps they were like brothers, and the chip that had fused with their genes was like their blood relation. In the eyes of the researchers, this was just a relationship between 2 experimental subjects. However, this chip was too special. Just like a blood connection, Sillin could sense Menji Arrow's existence even before he actually entered the planet. This was the connection between the chip. In the entire League of Stars, and even in this vast universe, Sillin and Menji Arrow were the only ones who shared such a special blood connection. Menji Arrow had been staring at Sillin all this time as if he was waiting for Sillin to make a decision. Menji Arrow, Holy Light, in the ancient language, was the race of the happy people who lived under the light in the myth of creation. Menji Arrow looked very serious and cold, but this name revealed his thoughts. Perhaps, when he was an experimental subject in an underground experimental base, he was just a person with nothing but a serial number. Menji Arrow didn't understand this world. What was life, what was ideal, and what was a dream? However, later, he stayed alone in this warehouse and released some of the information and images of the outside world that he had stolen while hunting through the projectors on the transport planes in the warehouse. He stood upside down on the roof of the warehouse and looked at the residents outside. He looked at the life under the sun and gradually understood the world outside the warehouse and the people outside. He knew that he was different from the others. Whether it was the people outside or the biochemical orcs in another pharmaceutical factory on a planet far away from here, he knew that no one on the entire planet could receive the signal he had released from the AI chip. It was like you were in a crowd and you were greeting people in a friendly way, but no one could understand you and no one responded. Disappointment had become a habit. He always went out at night because he knew that his existence was unusual. That was why he deliberately avoided daytime. Menkaluo remembered that he once saved a girl when he went out. When he rescued the girl from the hands of those evil forces, he was stabbed by the girl. She was a beautiful girl, but Monkey Arrow remembered the fear, alienation, and strong rejection in the girl's eyes when she looked at him. It was as if she was looking at an alien, a devil that people talked about. What did it feel like to be stabbed by a knife? Menji Arrow couldn't remember clearly, but it seemed to hurt a lot. He didn't know where it hurt. He couldn't integrate into this society, so he could only stay alone in this dark warehouse and look at the bright world outside through the projector day after day. Until one day, he released the signal that came from the chip as usual. It was like a habit that supported his life and proved his existence. It was something he had to do every day. The signal was received. Menji Arrow was waiting for him. He knew that the enemy would come. Sillin looked at Menji Arrow before turning around and walking toward the warehouse entrance. Huimao shot Menji Arrow a glance before following him to the door with Cheto. Menji Arrow didn't move, speak, or change in expression as he watched the trio walk out of the warehouse. However, when Sillin stopped at the warehouse entrance and yelled at Menji Arrow, "Follow me," Huimao saw light return to Menji Arrow's gray eyes. Chapter 4:15. Maybe it was because he had been isolated for too long, and the things he had experienced over the years, Monkey Arrow didn't like to speak, and he had trouble communicating with other people. Just like before, he answered every question and didn't want to say anything more than that. In fact, he wasn't even willing to express what he wanted or what he wanted. It wasn't convenient for Sillin to ask about the chip right now. He would talk to Monkiero after everything was over. This was their secret, and it couldn't be leaked. Otherwise, it would cause another conflict. Sillin left the warehouse and walked towards Ci Jincheng and the others. The passage along the way was still surrounded by all kinds of poisonous gas, but Monkiero wasn't wearing a protective suit. Just like Cheto, he was walking calmly inside. Hui Mao looked at Monkiero, and then at Sillin. He knew that Sillin and Monkiero were very similar. If Monkiero could resist the poisonous gas, then Sillin should be able to as well. So why was Sillin wearing such a thick protective suit? I don't understand. Flicking his ears, Hui Mao stopped thinking about it and crouched on Sillin's shoulder. He looked at Monkiero who was following behind him. He began to think about something. If Monkiero was trustworthy, then there were 4 of them including himself, Sillin, and Cheto. No matter what, they wouldn't lose to Sigma and his brothers. In Hui Mao's opinion, the 4 of them were similar. 2 of them had chips, 1 was a cyborg, and the last was a robot. All of them could communicate using the machine language. Wait, does this black idiot who just joined us know the machine language or not? Hui Mao looked at Monkiero and asked him a few questions using the machine language. But Monkiero simply looked at Hui Mao and didn't answer. Do you understand the machine language? Left with no choice, Hui Mao asked in the League of Stars language. I don't understand. Meng A Luo was still expressionless. That won't do. Hui Mao was wondering when he should teach Sillin the mechanical language. It wasn't every day that Hui Mao found someone with a mechanical structure similar to Sillin's, and he didn't want to give up. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Along the way, Hui Mao chatted with Monkiero. Sillin allowed them to do as they pleased. This was beneficial to Monkiero. If he were to join the 11th squad in the future, he would need to interact with others. Nonsense was the first line of communication, and Hui Mao's nonsense was especially useful at times like this. Ci Jincheng's side was almost done. All he needed to do was to wait for Sillin to arrive before retreating. When they saw the person following behind Sillin, Ci Jincheng and the others were a little shocked. This was because this person was nowhere to be found on the life signature display of the detector. There were no dots of light at all. It looked like a biochemical orc, but the detector did not have any indication of a biochemical orc. Moreover, this person wasn't wearing any protective clothing. It looked like he wasn't affected by the poisonous gas. However, since Sillin had brought him here, he wasn't an enemy. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't raise their guns or make any threatening gestures. This made Monkiero relax a little. Sillin, the person behind you is. Lung gestured for Sillin to introduce him. The person inside the warehouse used to be a biochemical orc experiment. He escaped and lived in the warehouse. Sillin gave a brief introduction of Mungiero's situation. There were a lot of things he left out, and the chip and Howley Hansen were secrets that couldn't be told to anyone. Ci Jincheng and the others didn't pursue the matter. They only needed to make sure that Mungiero wouldn't be a threat to them and wouldn't bring them any trouble. Under such circumstances, they were happy to receive a helping hand. Sillin asked Cheto to take out the map of miracles surrounding star zones. There would definitely be a base related to the nightmare taper on it. The cleanup activities at the trade zone and the upper 3 star zones were progressing rapidly, and a lot of bases had been eliminated. Relatively speaking, it was much more likely that Miracle's people had moved to the lagging star zones. Even the military couldn't carry out a cleanup operation in one go in the lagging star zones. The environment in the star zones was generally not good, and it provided some people with a natural protective barrier. It's too much time consuming to look for them one by one. Ci Jincheng frowned. Based on the current situation, the infected area in the League of Stars was even bigger. Although there was progress in developing a vaccine, there was still no cure for the root cause. They could only try their best to prevent the infected's condition from worsening. Are the project teams making no progress? Sillin asked. Those project teams were all authoritative people in the relevant fields. If they had no progress until now, then the situation wasn't ideal. C.I. Jincheng shook his head. Sillin thinks for a moment and looked at Mengjiero. Do you know anything about the nightmare taper? I don't. Then do you know where the people from the pharmaceutical factory went? Sillin asked from another angle. I know part of it. Tell us, we need some reference. Mengjiero pointed at the projected map and explained some of the information he knew in simple words. Although he didn't say much, it was all on point and gave Sillin and the others a lot of reference. So, the upper echelons should be going to these two places. Sillin summarized the information Mengjiero told him and circled 2 planets. Those were the 2 planets that the managers of the biochemical orc base went to the most. As for the others, they were scattered all over the place. Most of them were within these marked areas. It seemed like Mengjiero had spent some effort to understand the marked map that Ho Lei left behind. It was just that Mengjiero was a loner and was unwilling to go out. No matter what, let's go check out these 2 places first. It'll be more information if we can find the Nightmare Taper's base. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper itself, it'll be good if we know something about the virus it carries. At least, we can make a vaccine as soon as possible to reduce the deaths. C.I. Jincheng put the map away and looked at the others. Let's do it in a roundabout way. Even if we can't find the Nightmare Taper, it'll be worth it to find more information about the viruses. Knight patted the dust off his protective suit and said. The rest and Knight had the same thought. Mengjiero still had no expression on his face, but Sillin could sense that this guy was confused and a little nervous. After all, it was his first time coming into contact with so many people at such a close distance, unlike those who would shoot or scream when they saw him in the past. Mengjiero was extraordinarily sensitive to kindness and malice after living for so many years. However, he did not see any disgust or alienation from these people. He was just curious at most. His tensed body relaxed a little as well. When they were leaving the underground base, Long looked at Mengjiero and asked, Hey, brother, are you a biochemical orc? Mengjiero paused and nodded. The term biochemical orc was filled with the aura of a different race. However, Long did not look down on them when he said the term biochemical orc. We killed many biochemical orcs just now. They ran out of the base, Long said. Mengjiero was silent. While the others seemed to be walking seriously, but they were actually listening with their ears perked up. Mengjiero spoke, I killed many too. Long stared at Mengjiero and nodded, you're different from those biochemical orcs. Of course, he's my follower. Hui Mao said immediately. Kong Man was already waiting for them with the space plane when they got out of the underground base. Mengjiero hopped onto the boarding board after Sillin signaled him to do so. After entering the spaceplane, everyone sat down and rested. C.I. Jincheng told Kong Man about their next target planet and that they were in a hurry. What do we do with the things inside the warehouse? Knight gulped down some saliva and asked, those people will probably go fight for them immediately, right? The spaceplane inside the warehouse only had some system issues, but it would take a lot of time to repair. This was also why the people in the pharmaceutical factory were unwilling to repair it in the past. They were unwilling to fork out either time or money. Let's leave it to the 3 forces to decide. I believe they'll be willing to pay the price, Sillin said. When the situation on this planet happened, the 3 pharmaceutical factories had closed down one after another. All flying tools that could leave the planet were under the control of the people in the pharmaceutical factories, and all the spaceplanes that were not taken away had been disposed of except for that special warehouse. Those people have been loitering around the area lately, but they didn't notice us. Alan told Sillin and the others about the people who had been monitoring the area around the pharmaceutical factories recently. If the 3 forces were going to fight for it, there would definitely be a large-scale battle later on. It was also possible that they would divide it up in the dark. No matter what the 3 forces decided, it was no longer important to Silin and the others. Lung and the others were loitering around Mengji Arrow restlessly, trying to get close to him. Then, when they realized that Mengji Arrow wasn't as fierce as he looked, they even studied Mengji Arrow's wings out of curiosity. Hui Mao crouched on Silin's shoulder and looked in that direction, but the twitching of his tail from time to time told Silin that the guy was thinking of some kind of trick again. Finally, Hui Mao stood up and ran over with cat-like steps. Go away, go away. Hui Mao chased away the people who were studying Mengji Arrow's wings. He paused in front of Mengji Arrow and said as if he had made up his mind about something, "Can you cross your arms?" Like this. Hui Mao made a demonstration of crossing his arms. Mengji Arrow didn't say anything, but he did as he was told. Raise your elbows a little more. Don't move your upper arms. Yes, just like this. After seeing that there was no problem, Hui Mao jumped on Mengji Arrow's shoulder. When Mengji Arrow turned his head to look at him, Hui Mao raised his forefoot and pushed Mengji Arrow's head back so that it wouldn't stare at him. Then he jumped on Mengji Arrow's crossed arms and squatted down to try it. He felt uncomfortable, so he instructed Mengji Arrow to adjust his arms. It looked like Hui Mao was being held in his arms. When he finally felt that it was okay, Hui Mao squatted on Mengji Arrow's crossed arms and said, "You can put the wings back." Mengji Arrow did as he was told and formed a cloak again. "Okay, don't bother me. I'm going to sleep." Silin and the others, Silin seemed to see a moving cat's nest, a human-shaped cat's nest that worked hard without complaint. During this process, Silin noticed that Mengji Arrow seemed to be a little stiff, but it didn't reject it. "Never mind, I'll let that cat be cocky for a while, let it get closer to Mengji Arrow and cultivate their friendship as teammates. Come here, Silin." C.I. Jincheng waved at Silin while studying the information in his hand. Silin told Cheto to give the cat a beating if it got carried away. Otherwise, it would climb all over him. Cheto nodded. He would communicate with this new teammate of his. In terms of communication, Mengji Arrow couldn't compare to a pure robot like Cheto. "What's wrong?" Silin walked over and sat down opposite C.I. Jincheng. C.I. Jincheng didn't say anything and passed Silin a new set of information. Silin took it and looked at it. He raised an eyebrow and said, "It's starting to divide and reproduce." From this new information, Silin knew that the nightmare taper had begun to divide and reproduce. The nightmare taper multiplied by 2 divisions, just like a single cell. Also, they carried the same type of virus. "It's not easy to find the nightmare taper this quickly," Silin said. According to this information, the nightmare taper they captured now should be the first batch of division. A few authoritative research teams had begun to research this nightmare taper. They were divided into a few directions, such as suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation, and researching a virus vaccine. There didn't seem to be any progress in suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation. Right now, there was no way to completely suppress this creature's division. Even if there was, the method wasn't practical. As for vaccines, up until now, only 2 types of virus vaccines had been developed. Moreover, they were still in the experimental phase, so it was uncertain how effective they would be. Suppressing the nightmare taper's division and proliferation doesn't seem possible at this stage, C.I. Jincheng rubbed his forehead, but we can put more effort into the virus vaccine. The only thing we lack now is time. The virus is spreading too fast, and more planets are infected. Trade sector is especially bad. Silin handed the documents back to C.I. Jincheng and said, "We should be able to find information about those viruses when we look for Miracle's base this time." C.I. Jincheng smiled tiredly, "I hope so." Silin stopped talking. He really felt that he would find some important information soon. Moreover, there were hundreds of viruses in the nightmare taper's body. Most of them were difficult to deal with, including those man-made viruses. They couldn't be developed by a single research base, nor could they be developed overnight. Meanwhile, they did not find much information about the virus when they attacked Miracle's bases in the trade sector and the upper 3 sectors. In other words, the virus might have been developed in the research base in the other sectors. The results were then combined and implanted into the Nightmare Taper's body. There were a lot of lagging star zones, and they covered a lot of areas. The base distribution map Sillin obtained from Menji was only a part of it, but it would be enough to excite him if he could find some information about the virus. At this time, when the virus was wreaking havoc and people were panicking, feeling that they could not find a way out, the birth of every virus vaccine was a ray of hope. Their next target planet was also in Sector R. However, the planet's living environment was not good. There was an asteroid belt around it, and it was easy to cause an accident if someone with poor piloting skills came over. The planet was not big. According to the probe's report, it was a rank D habitable planet. There were no other large planets around it, and it was hidden in the asteroid belt. It was very difficult to be discovered. The ion storm just passed. Our luck is pretty good. Kong Man smiled. I really couldn't tell that Miracle's research base was here. Pride clicked his tongue. I wouldn't have noticed that there was a planet here if I didn't look closely. Lung looked at the star map in his hand and the image displayed on the screen in front of him. There was no planet like this on Sector R's official star map. There was only this asteroid belt. If it was an adventurer or a hunter regiment, they would definitely take a detour after learning that there was an asteroid belt here. However, the star map in Lung's hand was not the official star map of Sector R. It was a detailed star map drawn by the Andryra family themselves. He didn't expect that they would also overlook the planet hidden in this asteroid belt. How capable, Knight concluded. There is no moisture or atmosphere detected on the planet's surface. Judging from these general survival indicators, it is undoubtedly a rank D habitable planet. Kong Man explained the planet's detection information to everyone. If the markings are correct, then Miracle's research base on this planet is at underground. Everyone's spirits rose. The more hidden it was, the more it proved the importance of this research base. The more important it was, the more likely they would be able to find a solution to the Nightmare Taper. Menji looked at the crowd. He didn't quite understand why they were suddenly happy, but Cheto had explained it to him. As for how much he would understand, well, he would take his time. Hui Mao was still sleeping soundly inside the cloak. He didn't show any intention of coming out even when he heard that there was a discovery outside. Kong Man drove the spaceplane into the asteroid belt and found a nearby place to hide the spaceplane. They didn't dare to drive the spaceplane directly because they would be discovered. The asteroid belt provided them with a hiding spot. The special magnetic field here and the spaceplane's own concealment method made it very difficult to be discovered. Send 2 people to scout the path first and confirm if Miracle's base is there, C.I. Jincheng said. I'll go with Cheto, Sillin said. Everyone looked at Menji direction. The cat was not planning to come out. Count me in. It's safer with 3 people. Knight adjusted his protective suit. I'll go too. Let's split up and get ready, Lung also said. No, Sillin and the others will go first and observe the situation. If there really is a base here, then it must be a heavily guarded one. It's not good to have too many people. C.I. Jincheng stopped Lung from following them. He didn't allow anyone to go with them either. Menji walked over and didn't say anything. But it looked like he wanted to go too. No need, the 3 of us are enough. Help me keep an eye on that cat and don't let it cause trouble. Sillin said, also, there's no protective suit that suits you here. You'll have to wait for a while if you want to go into space. Menji nodded in response to Sillin's words. Let's go. Sillin patted Cheto and Knight. After checking their protective suits, they left through the hatch. Chapter 4:16. After Sillin and the other 2 exited the cabin door, they flew towards that planet in stealth mode. Although they couldn't fly very fast with the thrusters on their protective suits, it was still more stealthy than the others. Pride and 3 others followed closely behind Sillin and the other 2. However, they wouldn't step onto that planet like Sillin. Pride and the other two would hide somewhere closer to the planet so that they could cover Scylla and the other two in time if something unexpected happened. There wasn't anything very special on the surface of the planet. It was about the same as many rank D habitable planets. However, after Scylla had installed the scanner, the scanned image showed the situation beneath the ground. He had already confirmed the fact that a base existed on this planet. He didn't know what was installed inside the base to shield it from external detection, but the scanned image only revealed a rough outline of the base. As for the detailed structure map inside, they weren't able to obtain it at all. The scanner that Scylla had installed was given to him by C.I. Jincheng. This was also a device that the military had just developed not too long ago. Otherwise, they might not even be able to detect the outline of the underground base. No matter what, we've confirmed that a base does exist here. It's so well hidden that it's obvious how important this base is to Miracle. C.I. Jincheng was very excited as he looked at the scanned image on the screen. They had confirmed the base, but how to get in was another problem. According to the markings on the scanned image, this base had almost 10 exits on the surface. Some were big, some were small. Right now, all of these exits were closed. It's sealed up so well. Aren't those people bored inside? Lung asked as he looked at the planet displayed on the screen. As long as the internal stability is properly adjusted and an excellent life support system is in place, we can build an underground world. C.I. Jincheng said. However, the amount of manpower and financial resources needed to build an underground world like this is rather great. With Miracle's abilities in the past, this isn't a difficult task. Lung was well aware of the financial power of Miracle Corporation in the past. Back then, Miracle had too powerful a backer, and they had many supporters. The underground research they conducted was also able to rake in a large amount of money. Many of the rare minerals and materials were purchased by Miracle. On the planet, Scylla stretched out a finger and marked a few places on the map scanned by the scanner. They were the places where the entrances and exits were located. It looks like they're very vigilant, and they've made up their mind this time. These passageways are all sealed, and the slightest movement in the passageways will set off the alarm. If we go in, there'll probably be a group of people pointing guns at us before we even reach the base below. C.I. Jincheng and the rest understood what Scylla was saying. Knight was a little annoyed. He had seen the death toll and the death rate caused by the nightmare taper earlier. Now that he had finally found a problematic base, it was difficult for him to do anything about it. The people from Miracle were too cunning. They did not plan to come out for the time being. They ate, drank, and defecated underground. All the entrances were sealed. Opening them by force was not a good idea. What should we do? The people in the spaceplane could not make up their minds at the moment. They could fight and kill, but there was really nothing they could do about these things. Even the equipment that C.I. Jincheng took out now could not do anything about it, much less them. Scylla looked at the passageways on the map and said nothing. This time, there was nothing Huimao could do even if he showed up. This was because these passageways could not be touched. They could only come up with a good idea if they knew everything about the underground base. Let's try to hack into the network inside first, suggested Scylla. No, it's fine over there, but I'm too far away. The magnetic field around here affects me more. Also, the next ion storm is coming soon. Although the level of this storm is not considered high, it's more than enough to block communication and network signals. C.I. Jincheng couldn't do anything about this either. He believed that this was the reason why Miracle had built this base here. The frequent particle storms had caused many people who came to this area to retreat. No one was willing to stay here for long, so this planet could continue to exist in seclusion for a long time. Scylla frowned. When is the next particle storm? Estimated half an hour later, 34 minutes 17 to 19 seconds. C.I. Jincheng explained the estimation to Scylla. Also, I suggest that you all come back first and wait until this wave is over. In reality, everyone knew that even if they avoided this particle storm, who knew when the next wave would come? What if there were signs of the next wave after this one was over? Should they continue to wait? I'll go. A voice rang inside Silen's communicator. This wasn't the voice of anyone in the Taper Extermination Squad. However, Silen was very familiar with the owner of this voice. The moment the voice rang, Silen immediately knew where this person usually hid. The White Spirit. The White Spirit had been hiding at Cheto's place all this time. As long as she was unwilling to come out, and Cheto intentionally hid her, it was very difficult to be discovered. The White Spirit had been very quiet after hiding at Cheto's place. She was only using Cheto to understand this world. Silen knew that Cheto often brought the White Spirit with him when he was in the squad, but he didn't think that the White Spirit would come with him this time. But why didn't you and the others mention this when he called them? Why did they know that the White Spirit had escaped with Cheto? This is my own decision. I asked Cheto to keep it a secret, and I promised to keep it a secret. I didn't tell you and the others about it, the White Spirit explained. She just wanted to see this world. Although she was created by the Shi family's generation just like you and the others, she wasn't very close to them. In fact, her relationship with them couldn't be compared to the relationship between the 5 brothers. Cheto was the only person in the 11th squad who was close to her. How confident are you that you'll be able to get in? Silen asked. It's impossible to sneak into the underground base's network completely noiselessly. This base's defense network is very strong, but like you said just now, the next particle storm is coming very soon. But you just said that the next particle storm is coming soon. If we can make good use of this particle storm, it'll be a pretty good idea, the White Spirit said. Although the White Spirit had joined the 11th squad, she rarely interacted with the rest of the squad. She thought that you and the others were very far away from her, but she was very happy that the 11th squad had Cheto. Cheto had taught her a lot of things and helped her understand the world better. Every time she came into contact with the other side of the world, she felt that she wasn't just a living program anymore. She was able to understand human emotions more closely. The reason she stepped forward wasn't for the 11th squad or the Taper Vanquisher squad. It was for Cheto. No one but Cheto was privy to the conversation between the White Spirit and Silen. After circling in place for a while, Knight noticed that Silen was standing there blankly for a long time. He asked, "Do you have any suggestions, Silen?" Silen nodded. "Yes." "Ah." This time it was Knight's turn to be stunned. He was just asking casually, and he was already planning to return to the spaceplane and avoid the particle storm first. He didn't expect Silen to give him such a reply. "Go back to the spaceplane with them first. Cheto and I will stay here." "Why? You want to hack into the underground network?" "You can't. Even you will be greatly affected by the particle storm. All communication networks will malfunction for a short period of time, and how are you going to hack them if they're all intermittent? Also," Knight pointed at the protective suit on Silen's body, "this thing won't be able to protect you completely. Although the level of the particle storm that's about to hit you isn't that high, you may not be able to withstand the particle storm at its peak even if you wear the protective suit. Do you want to die? Let's go back to the spaceplane first." Knight tried to pull Silen's arm, but to no avail. "It's fine. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. Let's go back now." Knight grew anxious. There were still 18 minutes left, and they wouldn't have much time left if they dilly-dallied any longer. After all, it would take some time to get to the spaceplane from here. "What's wrong?" On the spaceplane, C.I. Jincheng asked after seeing that the duo hadn't moved yet. Knight told C.I. Jincheng about the situation. "What do you think, Silen?" C.I. Jincheng asked Silen. "Don't worry, Cheto and I will hack in. This is an opportunity." After 2 seconds of consideration, C.I. Jincheng said, "Come back first, Knight." "No, we must drag this kid back. It's too dangerous to stay here." Before Knight could finish, he saw a layer of armor covering Silen and Cheto's bodies. Then, the armor faded and they became invisible again. Knight struggled for a moment when he saw this. "All right, how could I forget that you still have a life-saving trump card? 2 layers of protection. Thinking about the level of the particle storm, Knight felt that this should work, right? In any case, don't force yourself. Just take out your energy shield if you can't hold on anymore. It doesn't matter if those people discover you, your life is more important. I know. You should go back now. Sillin raised his foot and kicked Knight. After Knight left the planet and retreated to the spaceplane, Sillin and Cheto arrived at a tightly closed passage. At first glance, it was impossible to tell that this was a passage. This place was so well integrated with the surroundings that it wasn't easy to be discovered. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Cheto still felt very guilty about bringing the white spirit out, so he didn't tell Sillin about the white spirit. It's nothing, you all have your own freedom. Sillin patted Cheto. Since you brought her with you, it means that you trust her. It's good that you have confidence in her. Also, we do need her help this time. By the time Knight, Pride, and the others had returned to the spaceplane, the particle storm was slowly forming and moving towards them. Are Sillin and the others really fine? Inside the spaceplane, everyone stared at the two dots on the screen. They really couldn't understand why they would attack when the particle storm was coming. How were they supposed to do it? It was hard to hack into the external network, wasn't it? Also, with such high energy particles and radiation, were those two really not affected by the storm? Cheto was one thing, everyone was numb to it and knew how special he was. But why was Sillin staying there too? If he says he has a way, then he has a way. Let's watch. Therefore, everyone stared at the screen closely. Even Monchi Arrow was standing behind them and watching everything on the screen. Hui Mao poked his head out of the collar of his cloak and didn't go back to sleep. 12 seconds left. After that, we won't be able to contact you for a certain period of time. Be careful, Sillin said to the white spirit. Amen, I know. I've experienced a lot of things like this in the past. The white spirit knew the particle storm very well. She was confident in herself. Get ready. Sillin signaled Cheto. Cheto crouched down and placed his hand at the entrance of the sealed passage, trying to get as close to the center as possible. Go, white. The moment before the particle storm reached this planet, the white spirit had already entered the sealed passage and snuck into the network inside the passage. She arrived inside the base in an instant. When the white spirit snuck into the network inside the passage, the underground base's alarm went off, but it wasn't very loud. The guards didn't pay attention to the faint alarm. After all, the sealed passage wasn't opened, and they attributed the alarm to the approaching particle storm. Due to the particle storm's influence, their internal communication was disrupted, the underground lighting system started flickering, a lot of instruments started going on strike, and the screens were starting to blur. However, the people in the base seemed to be used to this. They just minded their own business and paid no attention to the flickering screens and lighting system. They also didn't think that someone would hack into the base's network under such circumstances. Everyone in this place was very comfortable. Standing inside the spaceplane, C.I. Jincheng and the others were also strongly affected. They couldn't even contact Sillin, and the image displayed on the screen wasn't clear either. It was flickering, and they could only vaguely see the entrance of the passage and the two blurry flashing signals that represented Sillin and Cheto. Why do I feel like a white light flashed where Sillin and Cheto were just now? Lung said in a low voice. I think I saw it too, Knight answered. The others had seen the same scene. Although it was only for an instant, everyone's attention was very focused at the time. Moreover, the monitors weren't affected at the time, so they could see everything clearly. It can't be an out-of-body experience, can it? A few people thought to themselves. The high-energy particle flow and radiation interference caused the communication and scanning system to operate abnormally, and the internal power supply to be disrupted for a short period of time. Fortunately, the particle storm didn't last long, and it left as quickly as it came. 5 minutes later, everything returned to normal. How are things on your side, Sillin? Are you alright? C.I. Jincheng asked hurriedly after everything had returned to normal. Everything is going smoothly, Sillin answered. Following Silen's answer, the screen in front of Ci Jincheng and the others displayed a scene that delighted them. Is this the planet's underground base? Yes. Silen and Cheto were guarding the place, and they could also see the scene through the display on their masks. This was what they could see from the White Spirit's perspective. Everything in the underground base that had returned to normal was very calm. They didn't know that someone had entered. Chapter 4:17. The base hidden under the surface of the planet looked like a small town. It was divided into different areas, and the most important ones were the research area and the living area. Both the research area and the living area were very lively. From the White Spirit's point of view, the research area was pretty much the same as the other miracles bases. They were already used to the forbidden research, so they didn't have much of a reaction when they saw them, even if there was a newborn baby inside one of the liquid tanks that was kicking its little legs. Things like this had happened too many times. Anyone who came into contact with Miracle or investigated Miracle in depth would know something about it. Can we get the layout of the base? Silen asked. Not yet. The White Spirit moved through some of the equipment and the network. Sometimes, it attached itself to the experimental equipment or electrical appliances of various sizes. Sometimes, it would sneak into the people's microcomputers to check, but it had not found the detailed layout of the entire base. Forget it. Let's take it one step at a time and stabilize the situation, Silen said. There were not many people in the base, but they seemed to be in good spirits. Sometimes, a few of them would sit together and chat while they ate, and the content of their conversation would be about what was happening in the League of Stars. These people did not have any taboos there, and they could talk about many things, such as the nightmare taper and the virus. It had to be said that those who could hide in this place had the right to speak in Miracle. Even if they could not compare to the higher-ups who had been captured by the 8 armies, the fact that they had such secret information proved their identity and status. Silen did not ask the White Spirit to look for the secret information that was secretly stored in some equipment. Instead, he asked her to listen to these people's conversation. Instead of looking for it blindly, it would be better to wait for a while and get a general idea from these people. Then, they would look for it with the general idea. Everything the White Spirit had heard and seen in this place gave everyone enough information to shock them. Some of them were bragging when they were drunk, some of them were chatting when they were having a private meeting, and some of them mentioned it when they were discussing research progress and facts. The base made them feel at ease, and they lowered their guard. There were always some people who were not as secretive as they thought they were. A person's willpower was actually much lower than they thought it was. As a result, Silen and the rest had a rough understanding of the Nightmare Taper's operation within 2 hours. In between, there were 2 particle storms. Whenever this happened, these people would put down their work, chat, or engage in some lewd activities. But this was the time when they could learn the most information, and it was also the time when it was most convenient for the White Spirit to act. All the information on the devices was stolen at this time, and only then would the people in the base not suspect anything. According to what these people said, the Nightmare Taper was indeed activated after it was unsealed. Theoretically, it could carry thousands of types of viruses. That was the result of the Nightmare Taper's research. However, after Si Fang's taper extermination operation, the Nightmare Taper, which had just been revived, was more or less restricted. According to the information received in the letter, the descendant Nightmare Taper that was captured in the infected zone carried 237 types of viruses. If it was really a new generation that had split, the mother Nightmare Taper would not have more than 1,000 types of viruses at most if they were to extrapolate upwards. The mother Nightmare Taper could only have one descendant every time it split. The descendant Nightmare Taper would be stored after each split and wait for the next descendant to split from the mother. Only the descendant that split from the mother would have the best effect because each split would reduce the number of viruses. The viruses they carried might not be replicated completely. It was a random replication. Just like the second-generation Nightmare Taper that split from the mother Nightmare Taper, the viruses they carried might not be the same. There might even be a huge difference in the number of viruses they carried. The more types of viruses they carried, the slower they split. Moreover, although the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation nightmare tapers split fast, their quality could not compare to the 2nd and 3rd generation nightmare tapers. To ensure that they had an excellent source of infection, Miracle's people had been waiting for the mother to split. They would only take revenge when they had enough excellent sources of infection. This was also the reason why they hadn't made a move even after so much time had passed, even though they had been surrounded by various parties and had captured so many of their higher-ups. Unfortunately, this was not the base to study the nightmare taper. Moreover, these people had no idea where exactly the mother was. If they wanted to solve this crisis completely, they would have to find the mother in the end. Otherwise, the virus infection would last for a long time. Only the activated mother would have complete antibodies against the hundreds of viruses. The descendant did not have such antibodies, so the information that they could find from the descendant nightmare taper was limited. The main reason for the existence of this base was to develop some of the viruses. 86 types of man-made viruses were produced in this secret base. These viruses were then handed over to the people at the headquarters. Then, the people at the headquarters would implant the viruses produced by the other bases into the mother nightmare taper. What made everyone feel helpless was that the base had handed over the detailed information of the viruses when they handed over the 86 types of viruses. Meanwhile, the information and data regarding the 86 types of viruses on all the devices and equipment in this base had been wiped clean permanently. This was to prevent the internal personnel from leaking the information and causing all their efforts to go to waste. It was obvious how careful Miracle was when it came to this matter. We don't have the data of those viruses, but according to that big-bellied guy just now, there's still a vaccine here. Lung tapped his fingers. These people have been injected with the vaccine. They're not afraid of being infected by these 86 types of viruses. The vaccine should be real, but we don't know where the vaccine is hidden. Do you have any ideas, Silan? C.I. Jincheng asked. Silan was the one who infiltrated the base, so C.I. Jincheng had to ask Silan's opinion. Silan thinks for a moment and said, "We can definitely find it if we want to, but we'll have to plan how we should act after we find it." Indeed, no one could get in right now, and the emergency alarms would go off the moment there was a small crack in the sealed passageways. The problem now is how to get the vaccine. If we can move the vaccine to the passageway, we can act as soon as possible even if the alarm goes off, C.I. Jincheng said. Get the vaccine, let me think about it. Silan contacted the White Spirit after he finished talking to C.I. Jincheng. Can you control the housekeeping robots in the base? Silan asked. Actually, the White Spirit had already found the place where the vaccine was stored. What they needed to do now was to come up with a plan of action. Yes, they're not hard to control. However, if I control a housekeeping robot, I won't be able to pay attention to anything else. The White Spirit answered. You don't have to pay attention to anything else. The next small-scale particle storm will arrive in 25 minutes, and it will last for around 10 minutes. It'll be best for us to act then, but we need to hurry. Are you confident? 10 minutes, won't be easy. The place where the vaccine is stored is a little troublesome, and the closest exit will take us 5 minutes. The housekeeping robots have a speed limit here, and they can't go faster than a certain speed. If we go too fast, we'll attract their attention. How long will it take? Based on the speed of the housekeeping robots and the factor of deciphering the door of the warehouse where the vaccine is stored, how long do you think it'll take? The White Spirit thought for a moment, a conservative estimate of 15 minutes. If we run into other things, it'll probably take a little longer. Silan nodded. He believed in the White Spirit's estimate. In that case, they had to wait for an opportunity. Once he thought about it, Silan discussed it with C.I. Jincheng and the others. Everyone agreed to wait for an opportunity. After all, they could only succeed in this operation. Once they took action, they could not afford to wait any longer. This is the first time I've hoped for a larger particle storm to appear, Knight joked. Isn't that so? In the past, when I heard about a particle storm, I would run as fast as I could and avoid it. I've never looked forward to it this much. Feng Haichao exercised his arms and prepared for the upcoming operation. A person's strength is limited, no matter what. Sometimes, we have to rely on the right time and the right place. Yu Lu sighed. Even if he was a sharpshooter, so what? He had already faced many setbacks. Mengqi Arrow stood quietly behind him. He was silent, and Hui Mao had never come out of his cloak after he shrank back into it. The others thought that Hui Mao was tired and wanted to sleep, but Mengqi Arrow could sense that there was something off about Hui Mao. In truth, it probably wanted to follow Silen out, didn't it? However, what was the reason for it to stay on the aircraft? While waiting for an opportunity, everyone discussed their next move. While the small particle storm was interfering, the white spirit in the base had already started moving. She was choosing her target, and she had more than one target. This was because the robots in the research zone were not allowed to leave the research zone, and the robots in the living zone were not allowed to enter the research zone. On the surface of the planet, Silen said to Cheto, "When the time comes, I'll take the vaccine. You support the white spirit and prevent those people from forcefully interfering with the communication network. Don't hide your ability, just attack their control system directly. Buy time for the white spirit. It doesn't matter even if all the control systems inside collapse, especially the martial arts system that can extend out. When the time comes, leaving will be easier. This time, we can't do it quietly. Since we can't do it secretly, we'll do it openly. No matter what, with the white spirit as the leader, even if we can't get the vaccine, we'll bring her back first. After all, the speed of a robot's movement while attached to it is far slower than her stealth speed in the network." "Yes, I will." Fortunately, after the small particle storm was over, the next one would be of a higher level. It was estimated that it would last around 15 to 17 minutes. "Let's go with this one. This is already the longest storm we've been through," Silen said. If they waited any longer, there was no telling if there would be another storm that lasted longer than 10 minutes. "Then it's decided. You can start preparing now, I'll send them over too," C.I. Jincheng answered. While waiting for the particle storm, C.I. Jincheng informed everyone on the spaceplane. Like before, everyone except Kong Man and Alan started moving. Mengqi Aluo was not among them. He and Hui Mao were also on the spaceplane. There were 14 space fighters. The space fighters were not big, and there were only 2 seats in the cockpit. One was for the pilot, and the other was reserved for the people who would receive them when the time came. Can these fighters really withstand the particle storm? Knight looked at the fighters in front of him doubtfully. He wasn't afraid, he was just puzzled. If they can't, they'll still be affected. But let's fly the fighters over first and hide behind the asteroids closest to the planet. Even if we can't withstand the particle storm, we can still activate our shields and hold on for a while. The possibility of being discovered is very small, C.I. Jincheng said. In reality, even if the possibility of being discovered was very small, they weren't going to activate their shields. Everything would be for naught if they were discovered. Just hide inside the fighters with the protective suits. It's fine as long as we don't die. It's not like we're those weaklings. Didn't you see that Silen and Cheto have survived a couple of rounds already? Pride raised his chin and looked at Knight and the others disdainfully. Knight curled his lips, "I was just saying. Let's go." Cut the crap. Lung had already jumped into the space fighter. The others also jumped in one after another. Mengqi Arrow was still standing at his original position in the control room. Alan didn't really know how to start a conversation, but he didn't have the time right now. He had too much work to do. As for Kong Man, he was still the main pilot of the spaceplane. He had even less time to take care of people, so he just sat there and didn't say a word. The originally lively discussion in the control room suddenly quieted down. The signal points of the space fighters that flew out could be seen on the screen in the control room. These signal points were all moving towards that planet. Mengqi Arrow lowered his head and looked at Hui Mao, who was hiding inside his cloak. The cat was currently propping up its ears and moving them from time to time. It was obvious that it wasn't asleep and had been paying attention to the movements outside. It even looked a little nervous, and the restless movements of its paws showed that the fellow had been itching for a long time but had been suppressing it all along. Before the next particle storm arrived, C.I. Jinchang and the others had already found cover and parked their space fighters on the nearest asteroids. They were waiting for an opportunity with their backs facing the planet. Sillin and Cheto had changed their location. The previous passage was a little far from the passage that the White Spirit planned to transport the vaccine out of. In order to better receive the White Spirit and save time, Sillin and Cheto arrived at the passage they planned. This tightly sealed passage led to a place where the research zone and the living zone intersected. The research zone was more heavily guarded, and during the non-particle storm period, the security there was even tighter. It was probably to prevent information theft. That was why the White Spirit didn't attack from there. There were fewer entrances and exits there, and compared to the research zone, the defense of the planned passage was relatively lax. Although it would take half a minute longer to arrive here, it was safer. Also, there were only some large transport robots in the research zone, so it was impossible to transport the vaccine to the passage. No transport robot would go to the passage area, but the small robots in the living zone were different. There were a lot of them, and they would go to many places. There were also robots that came to the passage area to clean up, so they wouldn't attract any suspicion here. After receiving the preparatory information from C.I. Jinchang and the others, Sillin informed the White Spirit that they could begin. In the living zone, a small cleaning robot's eyes flashed with white light. Then, it headed towards a certain direction. There were too many robots like this in the living zone, so no one would pay attention to what this robot was doing. This small robot moved forward at the same speed as the other robots. Occasionally, it would stop to clean up some dirt on the ground. Although it would stop and do some work, and it would take a few turns to clean up the dirt, it was actually heading in the same direction. The small robot stopped at a corner near the passage. Just like the other cleaning robots, it would stop to rest after working for a while to save energy. After the little robot stopped, in the research area, on the walkway outside several large laboratories, a robot that looked like a cart slowly moved forward. Every time it passed by a large laboratory's garbage outlet, it would stop, open the garbage outlet's outer cover, and take out some recycled, filtered, and some non-recyclable waste liquid from inside and put them on the cart. This was also the underground base's cleaning robot. It was a robot that was only active in the research zone. They would transport the research lab's waste and some used non-recyclable high-risk items to one place for centralized disposal. The cleaning time of these robots was not fixed. Sometimes, some labs were busier and there would be more waste, so these robots would clean up more frequently. Therefore, when this cleaning robot came over to clean up, it did not attract the attention of the researchers in the labs. Slowly, it moved towards a fork. When it reached the fork, the lighting equipment in the passageway and the display screens of the various labs started flashing. The storm was coming. Some people in the lab began to curse. However, every time they encountered this situation, these people would stay in place, sit down to rest, or take a nap. It was not a good idea to go out at this time. If they were unlucky enough to encounter a problem with the equipment, or if some equipment was accidentally damaged due to the discharge or explosion of this particle storm, it would be a tragedy. The walkway that used to be frequented by people from time to time was now empty. No one noticed that the cleaning robot did not move along its usual cleaning route. Instead, it turned a corner and went to the other side. Its speed was also a lot faster. Some of the hidden sensor equipment here were all on strike at this moment, and there was no response to the cleaning robot's non-set path. Soon, the cleaning robot stopped in front of a closed metal door. Inside the door, the storm did not affect it much. Perhaps it was because there were important things frozen here, and it took extra effort to build it. The instruments here were all working normally. The password lock on one of the refrigerated cabinets jumped a few times, and then it opened automatically. White mist spread out from inside. Not far away, there was a mechanical arm on a shelf. This mechanical arm was used to help pick up items from high places. Now, It was moving the wheels below it. It came over to take out a box from the refrigerator, closed the refrigerator, and restored the settings and data on the door. There was also a password lock on the box. Just like the refrigerator, the data on the password lock flashed a few times, and then it was unlocked. The mechanical arm opened the box, revealing the contents inside. After checking, the mechanical arm closed the box again, and the password lock was restored. The mechanical arm moved the box to the door. When it reached the door, the warehouse door opened. When it opened, there was a prompt sound, but at this time, because of the influence of this particle storm, some of the instruments in the lab malfunctioned and sounded an alarm, covering the alarm sound of the warehouse door. At the same time, the screen in the control room of the research area kept flashing, and it was impossible to see what was happening there. At this moment, the monitor was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. The mechanical arm placed the box in a hidden position in the middle of the cart, then retreated, and the door closed. The cleaning robot retreated, calmly leaving at the fork, and went to the planned location. Everything here was quiet again. Sillin looked at the time. There were still 3 minutes left before the storm passed. 3 minutes was enough for the White Spirit to reach the exit. 1 minute before the storm ended, the handover between the cleaning robot in the research area and the cleaning robot in the living area was completed. The box was moved from the former to the latter's cleaning slot. 30 seconds before the storm ended, the small robot reached the planned entrance and opened the tunnel. Beep! A sharp alarm rang through the entire base with a suppressive sound wave. What's wrong? Who opened the tunnel? Hurry up and investigate. The people in the base were stunned by the alarm. The storm had not completely ended, and some people were even wondering whether the particle storm had caused the system to malfunction. To be safe, the guards acted quickly. When they discovered the reason, the small robot with the box in the open tunnel had almost reached the exit outside. Activate the mandatory defense. But the storm hasn't stopped, activate. Yes. The base was instantly in a panic. But soon, they discovered that the external defense system was not just affected by the particle storm. There was also some other reason that prevented the tunnel from being forcefully closed. Who is it? Outside the tunnel, Cheto's eyes flashed. He was dragging the defense system so that it could not forcefully close the tunnel. It was extremely difficult to do this while the particle storm was still ongoing. When the particle storm was about to end, the external tunnel was opened. The small robot came out of the tunnel, and Sillin and Xing rushed up to it at the same time. Sillin took the box, and Cheto took the White Spirit back. While Sillin and Cheto were running toward the entrance of the passage, 5 space fighters swayed and flew toward them. Due to the particle storm, they couldn't maintain their stealth state at all, and they couldn't fly normally either. Fuck, this is the first time I've flown a space fighter in a particle storm. If the old man knew about this, he'd say we're crazy. Knight shouted while piloting the space fighter. However, his tone was filled with excitement. Although driving through the particle storm wasn't stable and dangerous, everyone's morale was high because they had obtained the vaccines for the 86 viruses. They were going to protect Sillin and Cheto even if it meant risking their lives. At a time like this, no one cared if the storm had stopped or not. By the time Sillin received the box, the 2 space fighters were already behind them. Sillin jumped into the air, and with the help of the thrusters, he directly entered the open hatch of the space fighter. On the other side, Cheto also entered the other space fighter. The storm had completely passed. The timing was just right. The space fighters behind them also flew over and helped cover the 2 space fighters. The base that started to attack because the storm had stopped focused on the space fighters numbered D-793 and D-791 on their wings. They saw the 2 men jump into the 2 fighter jets with the same serial numbers. No matter what these people had taken, they had to kill Wuxia since they had come out of this place. The 2 large entrances on the surface had also opened, and a few space fighters flew out of them one after another to intercept the intruders. The exchange of fire between the 2 sides was very intense, but Sillin and Cheto's movements were simply too fast. By the time the base caught up to them, they were already close to the asteroid belt. However, this didn't dissuade the base's personnel from giving chase. Instead, they attacked even more crazily than before. In fact, they didn't even hesitate to use weapons like shockwave bombs. They didn't care even if their own people were within range of the shockwave. However, the 14 fighter jets were too cunning. They shuttled through the asteroid belts as nimbly as fish, skillfully avoiding the shockwaves and the other party's attacks. They even deliberately released a smoke bomb. The dispersed smoke and dust covered the area, making it difficult for the people at the base to see which two fighter jets they were. However, the base's personnel had already identified the numbers on the space fighters' wings, and they used almost all their firepower to attack the two space fighters. A spaceplane appeared from the asteroid belt. It didn't slow down, and just like the space fighters, it weaved through the asteroid belt and flew towards the periphery of the asteroid belt. At the same time, it opened its hatch to let the space fighters in. It didn't matter if the other space fighters flew in, but the base's personnel landed on the two space fighters numbered D-793 and D-791 at the very end. Unfortunately, these two space fighters were the strangest among the space fighters. They were extremely difficult to lock onto, and there were a couple of times when they performed super maneuvers such as rapid turning and dodging. Gradually, all 14 space fighters flew back into the spaceplane. The two space fighters that were targeted were the last to enter. After all of them had entered the spaceplane's protective shield was activated, and it left the asteroid belt at full speed. Inside the spaceplane, the space fighters that Sillin and Cheto jumped out of weren't D-793 or D-791. Knight and Pride were the ones who jumped out of the two numbered space fighters. At this moment, the numbers on the space fighters' wings disappeared at the same time. Numbers were used to fool people in the first place. Who the fuck would be stupid enough to put a number on their own space fighter's wings and use it as a target? In reality, the base's personnel would have thought things through if they had calmed down, but they were too anxious at the time and neglected it. Chapter 4:18. Everyone knew that the asteroid belt was dangerous. Plus, there were some magnetic field disturbances here that increased the difficulty of flight. Therefore, most people would slow down after entering the asteroid belt to ensure their safety. However, right now, the pursuit in the asteroid belt was incomparably crazy. Shattered asteroid fragments shot out in all directions like cannonballs, and the occasional shockwave would shatter everything within its area of effect. Many aircrafts were caught in the shockwave and destroyed indiscriminately. However, this did not cause the pursuers to stop or retreat. They kept on chasing after the spaceplane in front of them. Can we go any faster? Knight looked at the aircrafts that were chasing closely behind them on the screen. It looked like they were really going all out. The hardest people to deal with in this world were lunatics who didn't care about their lives. No, we're still in the asteroid belt after all, and the magnetic field and disturbances around us are too troublesome. Add to that the spaceplane's size, this speed is already reaching its limit. If we increase our speed any further, we won't be able to guarantee our safety. If we crash into those asteroids, even if it's just a slight graze, the people behind us will seize the opportunity and destroy the spaceplane. C.I. Jincheng said solemnly. They were all anxious. They had obtained the vaccines for the 86 viruses, but it wasn't easy to leave this place safely. After all, that planet was in the asteroid belt. Even leaving was troublesome, and they couldn't enter warp speed under these circumstances. It really wasn't easy to shake off the pursuers behind them. Kong Man was sweating profusely. Although Knight and Pride were currently assisting with piloting, his thoughts were highly focused right now in order to avoid wave after wave of increasingly concentrated shockwaves and cannon fire, as well as the scattered fragments and asteroids in front of them. The enormous amount of calculation in his brain and the control of his hands had reached their limits. Although he was tired and exhausted, he couldn't switch out now. This wasn't the time, any mistake would cause all of his previous efforts to go to waste. Sillin opened the detailed star map of the asteroid belt, looked at the distance between their current location and the edge of the asteroid belt, and then looked at the pursuers behind them. He turned around and said to Ci Jincheng and the others, if we don't consider avoiding the enemy's cannons and shockwaves, and increase our speed by half, do you have the confidence to avoid the asteroids? Ci Jincheng thought for a moment, yes. We can. Knight answered without turning his head. Pride's reply was the same. That's good. Sillin took off the thick protective suit and prepared to leave the control room. Hey, where are you going? Feng Haichao stopped Sillin and asked. Create some trouble for those people behind us. We're almost at the edge now, but looking at the behavior of those people in the base, I reckon that there will be a large-scale explosion next. At that time, it'll be difficult to avoid it. Cause trouble. Right now, those fellows are rushing over here as if they're not afraid of death, and there are so many of them. As he spoke, Feng Haichao suddenly paused and looked at Sillin in shock. Don't tell me you're going to go out alone to cover their retreat. Sillin looked at his idiotic expression and replied, I'm not that noble. With that, Sillin walked out. Hey, Sillin, are you confident? Do you need help? Long called out. Sillin did not turn around. He made a, don't worry, gesture. What is that guy planning to do? The other people in the control room asked. I don't know, Cheto. Do you know what that kid Sillin is planning to do? Long looked at Cheto. Cheto looked up and calmly swept his gaze across the people around him. Then, he took out a book and fell silent. Everyone. Sillin walked toward the exit. By the time he got close to the exit, his body was already covered in armor. Turn off the protective shield, Sillin said into the communicator. After the aircraft's protective shield was turned off, the hatch opened. Sillin flipped over and held onto the aircraft's outer shell tightly to prevent himself from being thrown out. The exit was above the aircraft at a 45-degree angle. Right now, Sillin was stuck to this inclined surface. Hey, Sillin, are you okay? Do you want to slow down? Knight asked from the communicator. No need. Just stay in your previous state. Sillin stuck close to the aircraft's outer shell and slowly flipped over to face the pursuers behind him. With a shake of his hand, a cannon appeared in his hand. Some of the asteroid fragments created by the shockwave bomb had hit the aircraft's surface. Since the protective shield had been turned off, a couple of holes had been created. A fist-sized fragment smashed half a meter away from Sillin. Looking at the crater it created, if it had hit a person, even if they were wearing protective clothing or armor, they would at best be left half dead. The shockwave wouldn't stop, and the aircraft couldn't lock onto its target even if it was fast enough. This was also why the people on the aircraft didn't bother to shoot. Sillin held the cannon in his hand and searched for the best spot to use it. The aircraft traversing through the asteroid belt would sway slightly from time to time due to the debris caused by the shockwave. Its surface was already full of holes. Fortunately, the aircraft's quality was reliable. So far, it was only a few superficial wounds. On the other hand, Sillin, who was holding the cannon barrel, did not seem to care about his surroundings at all. Even when the fragments collided with him a few times, or when he avoided an asteroid in front of him, Sillin did not seem to care about any of this. He did not even think about it. Right now, in his eyes, there were only the fighter aircrafts that were chasing after him, and the asteroids that were randomly distributed around him. Now's the time. A white net that seemed to be weaved out of lightning spread out from here. There wasn't just one. 3 large nets were spread out from 3 different directions. After shooting, Sillin immediately entered the hatch. I'll leave it to you guys. Sillin lay on the ground outside the hatch and said to the people in the control room on the other end of the communicator. Kong Man and the others who were piloting the aircraft didn't have much energy to pay attention to what was happening right now. They only knew that there was a powerful force coming from behind, and it was very destructive. Lung and the others who weren't piloting the aircraft could clearly see that the white lightning weaved into a giant net, slicing the asteroids and the pursuing aircrafts into pieces. Every collision would result in an explosion of energy. When these energies were stacked together, it was like a huge bomb. The stacked and strengthened explosions spread out in all directions. The asteroids were blown to smithereens, and the aircrafts within the explosion range were no longer visible. They disappeared in the explosion and turned into cosmic dust. After Scylla entered the hatch, the aircraft's protective shield was activated again. The aircraft shook even more violently, but it didn't slow down. Pushed by the explosion, the aircraft's speed instantly increased. The people piloting the aircraft felt their adrenaline soar to the limit. It wasn't just the people piloting the aircraft. Even Lung and the others who were watching from the side felt suffocated by the tension. There were a couple of moments when the aircraft almost brushed past a couple of asteroids. They didn't even have the time to catch their breath before the almost collided situation happened again and again. Lying at the hatch entrance, Scylla didn't get up. Last time, his entire arm was almost crippled after firing a single shot, but now he had fired 3 shots in one go. His entire arm was numb, and his entire body was overwhelmed by intense exhaustion. Scylla decided that he might as well lie on the ground and rest for a bit. Even if Kong Man, Knight, and the others were too busy, Cheto and the White Spirit were still helping them from the shadows. If even they couldn't hold on together, then they had no choice but to resign themselves to fate. Scylla closed his eyes and counted the time. The moment Scylla opened his eyes, the aircraft had exited the asteroid belt, entered warp speed and left this place. It was only now that everyone began to breathe carefully. Their nerves were too tense just now, so much so that they couldn't even breathe properly. They could hear their own hearts pounding and their veins pressing against their blood, and they were still a little dazed. As for the people piloting the aircraft just now, their arms were shaking. What the fuck? That scared the hell out of me. Knight lay on the chair and stopped looking at the control panel. After the aircraft entered warp speed and set up autopilot, Feng Haichao and the others came over to take over the control panel. Judging from the current situation, the people behind them hadn't caught up to them yet. Lung pinched his arm. Thank goodness I'm still alive. I didn't crash into those asteroids and end up as a decoration for the stars. Hey, Scylla, are you alright? It was only now that everyone had the chance to pay attention to Scylla. It was because Scylla hadn't entered the control room yet. I'm alright. Scylla had already taken off his armor and staggered inside. I'm going to rest for a bit. The box containing the vaccine had been stored away by C.I. Jincheng. Those instruments were also beginning to analyze the vaccine and create more vaccines based on it. Are you really alright? I'm fine. Scylla walked into his own lounge. Call me if there's anything urgent. Amen, rest well. Right now, Knight and the others were tired as well. They really needed a break. After enduring the particle storm head-on and going through this stressful event, everyone needed rest and self-recovery. After Scylla entered the lounge, Huimao crawled out of Meng Chi Arrow's cloak and signaled Meng Chi Arrow to go to Scylla's lounge. Meng Chi Arrow didn't say anything and walked in the direction Huimao pointed. When they arrived at the entrance of Scylla's lounge, Huimao hopped off and asked Meng Chi Arrow to sit beside him for a while. It then entered Scylla's lounge by itself. Scylla sat by the bed instead of lying down to rest. It seemed to be waiting for Huimao. Huimao looked at Scylla and jumped onto the bed after making sure that Scylla wasn't heavily injured. Is that thing done? Scylla asked. Yes, it's done. Huimao opened his mouth and spat out a transparent liquid container that was 30 centimeters tall. There was an object the size of an egg in the transparent liquid container. It was moving as if it was going to come out. Scylla opened the can of liquid, and the thing inside came out and climbed up Scylla's outstretched palm. Scylla smiled as he looked at the thing in his hand. Is this thing really useful? It doesn't look like the nightmare taper. Isn't the nightmare taper very small? This thing is too big, Huimao commented on the thing that crawled out of the liquid container. The reason we didn't participate in the operation this time was because Scylla had given it a mission. Certain conditions were needed for the thing inside the liquid tank to grow, but those conditions were too harsh. In fact, a single violent shake might cause the thing to stop growing. Therefore, Scylla had given the liquid tank to Wheeze. Therefore, the gray cat began its incubating life for a period of time. It nested peacefully inside Menji Arrow's cloak and slept. Fortunately, the thing grew very fast. It grew from a tiny grain that was barely visible to the naked eye to its current size in such a short time. Scylla took a good look at the thing in his hand quietly. In terms of size, there was indeed a huge difference between it and the nightmare taper. However, it looked 80% similar to the nightmare taper in terms of appearance. Moreover, its genes were more than 99% similar. After all, it was the nightmare taper that was born from it. Yes, the thing in Scylla's hand was all sorts of genetic information that Scylla decoded based on Communidon's records. After connecting it with the information that he obtained today, it was the ancestor of the man-made nightmare taper. In other words, it was the so-called primordial before it was modified by the virus. This primordial body could help Scylla locate the dream taper. No matter if it was the dream taper's mother, the dream taper's offspring, or even the dream tapers that had been split into a few generations, it could sense them as long as they were within a certain range. Scylla named this primordial Emperor. The primordial being called Emperor stayed in Scylla's hand for a while. Then, it followed Scylla's order and burrowed into Scylla's palm. The protruding skin gradually subsided, and it was impossible to tell that a thing the size of an egg had just entered his palm. Due to the nightmare taper's tiny size, it was difficult to catch them. According to the information that they had gathered earlier, it took them a lot of effort to catch the nightmare taper that had split from its offspring. He could only control the virus after he had the nightmare taper under control. If the virus didn't work, then he could only rely on the nightmare taper. While Scylla was thinking, he noticed that Huimao had suddenly quietened down beside him. He looked over and saw that the cat was propping up its ears. The fur on its ears was trembling, and it was obviously eavesdropping on something. Moreover, it looked more and more impatient with disdain and contempt. It was probably something bad. As expected, it didn't take long before Ci Jincheng contacted Scylla to discuss some matters with him. Everyone was gathered in the control room. Just now, Ci Jincheng had told them the new news he had received. Communication had become much smoother after they left the asteroid belt, and they were in a hurry to contact the army they were in for support. Knight, Pride, and the others had their own channels of understanding as well. They didn't need Ci Jincheng's additional explanation. According to the news Ci Jincheng had just received, his father had asked him to hurry to Sector J's planet, JC335. Something had happened there. It was said that Senior Senator Bisor had been infected with more than one virus there. Ci Jincheng wasn't the only one. Knight and Pride had also received the same order when they contacted their fathers. The main reason they were worried about Bisor was because they wanted to obtain Bisor's support. This was because Bisor had always been a famous neutral party in the League of Stars' political scene. If they could obtain Bisor's support at a time like this and make him owe them a favor, they believed that they would be able to obtain Bisor's vote in the future. The army never separated from politics. Although it looked like the 8 Corps were the ones causing the most trouble right now, the few big families in the political scene were secretly making big moves as well. It was just that they were keeping a lower profile compared to the army. The power and ability in their hands couldn't be ignored, and the more support they received in the division of power in the future, the higher their chances of success would be. They finally had an opportunity like Bisor, and it just so happened that Ci Jincheng and the others had obtained another set of vaccines at this time. Not only that, on the day before they contacted their families, a research team had obtained 62 types of vaccines while they were researching the descendant nightmare taper that they had captured after much difficulty. Although there were a few overlaps with the vaccines Ci Jincheng and the others obtained, this was undoubtedly a great chance and a great hope. Double insurance. Knight, Ci Jincheng, Pride, and the others were in an alliance with each other. Therefore, if they could obtain Bisor's support at this time, their alliance would undoubtedly become even stronger. Right now, the vaccine they obtained had sent the analyzed information to all parties, and they could synthesize the vaccines based on this information. The cure and prevention operation had begun, and just like the politicians were clamoring for, the counterattack against the nightmare taper had begun. After that, they would have to rely on their own abilities to get support. There were still a few other important suspected bases on the star map they obtained from Monquiero, but C.I. Jincheng and the others had already contacted their own army. Naturally, there would be people taking action. What they needed to do now was to use this set of vaccines to save Bisor, and hope that the virus Bisor was infected with would be within the range of the vaccine's effects. Someone from planet J, C-335 has arrived to receive us. After all, the equipment on the spaceplane isn't complete, and the analysis information is limited. If we want to understand the virus better, we'll have to start with this set of vaccines for more detailed information. The person receiving us will take a part of this vaccine for analysis and research, and the other part will be used for rescue. Of course, the first person to be rescued is that old man Bisor, said Knight. He was also explaining to everyone the reason behind their actions. To be honest, Knight did not have a good impression of Bisor at all. In the political scene, people like Bisor were either conservatives or cowards if they were to put it nicely. He had never participated in the competition of those big interest groups, and he even abstained during the voting on the miracle. He abstained 20 years ago, and he abstained again this time. Knight felt like he had swallowed a fly in his heart when he realized that he had to save a person like this first to obtain the vaccines he had gone to great lengths to obtain. Sector J. That place seems to be a heavily infected zone right now. Lung frowned and drummed his fingers on the table. He didn't look as sloppy as he usually did, and he looked a little quiet. Right now, almost all of the trade zones are heavily infected zones. However, the ones infected are basically the civilians. Those with some power have armed their own territories and guarded them with 3 layers of defense. Kong Man's eyelids were drooping, and his voice was low and emotionless. However, his words sounded very resentful. Even if everyone was unwilling, Bisor's priority in assigning positions to the committee as a senior senator was enough to move everyone's hearts. It was no wonder that C.I. Jincheng and his family had asked them to hurry over and rescue him, afraid that someone else would beat them to it. Silan sat on his seat and listened to their conversation. He rubbed his palm and said, "Then let's go. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."